Have you watched the old guard movies? Did you like them? Well, it doesn't matter, because you will love the comics on which they are based. The Old Guard comics tell a story of betrayal, found family, eternal love, and the struggle to find the meaning of one's existence when time coalesces and turns into molasses. The story of 6 immortals who survive in the modern day. Some struggle with technology, some struggle with the concepts of immortality, some struggle to define humanity, but all of them struggle to define their purpose. Join us on this quest as we delve into the comics that inspired the 2 Netflix movies. However, before I begin, please consider clicking the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous long reads, and maybe consider becoming a member through the link in the description. Now, let's begin. The Old Guard, Volume 1, Opening Fire, Issue Number 1, Feeling Fine. This is a story of blood and bullets. It is the story of 1 woman and 3 men who cannot die. Mostly, their names are Andy, Nikki, Joe, and Booker. It is a story about time and age and ages, and about friendship, love and regret. These are the words that usher us into the world of Old Guard, and the first issue starts by introducing us to Andy, a young woman in her prime, haunted by her past while struggling with her present. Andy was once Andromache of Scythia a few thousand years ago. Back then, and still now, she's a ruthless warrior and an even more ruthless lover. However, to her, all of this, love, war, life, has become meaningless. She has done this a million times, and realistically might have to do it a million more times again if things carry on like this. She has been here before. She has done this over and over again, fighting wars and making love, and each time, over and over again, the same question haunts her. Is this it? Will this time be the one? As Andy struggles with her thoughts, we see her making love to numerous men and women over the years, while simultaneously being haunted by the memories of all the wars she has fought over the years. Every time she is alone, be it after war or be it alone in bed after making love, in that loneliness of the dark void, Andy is reminded that it's not her time yet, and frankly, she has grown tired of it. She is tired of going through the motions, tired of killing time, and tired of finding momentary peace only to then be left alone with her thoughts once again, her only constant and true companions over the past thousands of years. In the present day, Andy is once again getting dressed after a night of making love with some random stranger she met last night. The man clearly overslept, and he catches Andy in the middle of getting dressed and tries to apologize. He stammers and stumbles over his words and tries to tell her that he had a great time. All the while, Andy nonchalantly continues to get dressed while telling him that it's not a big deal. However, as the conversation continues, it's clear that the stranger is into her, but Andy isn't, and before he can tell his name to her, she stops him and says, "Do not tell me your name." "But why?" "Saves me the trouble of forgetting it." Andy then grabs her jacket and walks out of his apartment. We then see that she and her 3 partners are in Barcelona, and the latter are waiting for her at a street-side restaurant. Booker is growing more and more impatient, and this is when Joe is forced to remind him that Andy has always followed her own timetable. Unless it's about business, she is always following her own schedule. Booker then tells the 2 of them that James Copley has reached out to him regarding some new work. As the 3 of them talk, we learn that they worked with Copley a few years ago, precisely 8, and though at first Nikki assumes that Copley was a member of the MI6 or the SIS, Booker corrects him and tells the 2 of them that Copley used to work for the CIA, but right now he's working as an independent contractor. The last time they did a job for him, they had to go to Surabaya, and this is when Andy joins them and outright tells Booker to decline Copley's offer. This is when Joe begins to joke with Andy, and his jokes tell us that Andy sleeping around with random strangers each night is a regular thing, and that she likely does it to help pass the night a bit more easily. This is when Andy looks Joe dead in the eyes and reminds him that she might love him, but she won't take kindly to such jokes this early in the morning, especially not before she's had her coffee. Andy jokes about cutting Joe's throat again. However, Nikki and Booker's responses reveal to us that this has actually happened before. Not once, but 5 times. Andy then snatches away Booker's cigarette, and this is when he brings up Copley's offer again. He wants to meet with them and, he is currently in Paris. If they want, they could meet up with him tonight. However, this is when Andy shoots down his proposal again. She reminds him that they don't do repeat jobs for clients anymore, especially not during these modern times. Booker, however, is eager to convince Andy and his friends. After all, Copley's job is urgent, which is why he is offering them a lot of money for it. Nikki, however, just like Andy, isn't convinced. He doesn't trust Copley, and, in his opinion, men like Copley always have an urgent job that usually ends up screwing you over. Andy agrees with Nikki. However, this is when Booker plays the ace up his sleeve and says, "But it's a hostage situation, Andy. He says there's kids involved." Kids. This ends up turning the tide, and the next few seconds, which feel like minutes, are spent in utter silence. Nikki and Joe keep looking at Andy and Booker until Andy finally gets up from the table and says, "Tell him to be at Le Tambour at midnight. Nikki and I will meet him there. If he's late, we walk." And so, at midnight, Copley is busy drinking himself into a stupor at Le Tambour when Andy and Nikki show up. Andy tells Copley that he has exactly 5 minutes to say what he needs to. However, he starts by greeting them and then telling them how young they look and that they haven't aged a day. It's a calm and lonely night, enveloped in shadows and accented by the various lights in this bustling street. Families and couples are enjoying a hearty dinner all around them, but the mood Andy and Nikki bring to the table is in sharp contrast to this entire atmosphere. Copley, however, is maybe too drunk to pick up on this, and thus he decides to talk about the job Andy and her crew did for him 8 years ago in Surabaya. Before he can continue, however, Andy reminds him that he has 4.5 minutes remaining while pouring herself and Nikki some of Copley's wine. Copley gets the hint, and so he decides to get straight to the point. Copley starts by telling them how he is no longer working for the CIA. However, instead of outright naming his former employer, Copley refers to them as the company. He then tells Andy and Nikki that since leaving the company, he has been working in the private sector, providing security and intelligence services to various clients. One of his clients is a private human rights foundation that does a lot of charity work in North Africa. They distribute medicine and food, they build schools and hospitals, but things took a turn for the worse yesterday afternoon. A large group of armed men attacked one of the schools built by the foundation, which was located around 100 clicks away from the town of Juba. The group murdered all of the teachers ruthlessly and then abducted 17 students at gunpoint. All of the students were girls, which is why he contacted Andy's crew for the job, because they are highly professional. Copley also goes on to tell them that this is the reason why he pulled some strings in order to get all the information they might need if they take up this job. He has managed to track the group of men using satellite imagery. They know where they are, and this is when Copley hands over an iPad to Andy that contains all the information on it. This is when Andy stares at the iPad with a dumbfounded expression and quickly hands it over to Nikki. Copley tells Andy that the iPad contains everything: satellite imagery, maps, photos of the building where the girls are being held, and more. The problem is that in the last 24 hours, there haven't been any signs of the men bringing in food or water for their captives, which could either mean that they don't plan to stay there for long, or that they are going to split up their captives and abscond with them in different directions, which will make it nearly impossible to track them down. Andy already knows this, which is why she is now clearly invested in the conversation. Copley then goes on to cement the urgency of this operation. It's of paramount importance to carry out this job as soon as possible, and, in Copley's opinion, Andy and her crew are the best for the job. Copley then ends his pitch by telling Andy that he and his client are ready to pay any price if Andy takes up the job. And this is when Andy and Nikki get up from their chairs. After confirming that the contact protocols are already there on the iPad, Andy and Nikki start walking away. As she does so, she tells Copley, "We'll be in touch when it's done, Copley. We'll bill you then." This is when Andy gets a call on her smartphone, and she struggles to pick up the call. Nikki has to help her out by pointing out where she needs to tap, and this is a glimpse into Andy's struggles with modern-day technology, something that was changed in the movies. In the movies, Andy is well versed in modern technology, and this is heavily hinted at when she offers to take a group photo for a couple of tourists who managed to capture her in the background of one of their selfies. When Andy gets her hands on the phone, she slyly deletes the photo they took earlier and then snaps their picture. Let's continue the story now. Nikki teases Andy about her struggle with technology, and this is when she says that she liked the old phones. At least she understood those. However, this is when Nikki jokes that she couldn't couldn't properly work those either. Andy tells him to shut up and then takes the call. It's from Booker, and she informs him that they have taken up Copley's job. Unfortunately, they're on a tight schedule, which is why she orders him and Joe to rendezvous with them directly in Malta. She also tells him to call Way so that he can meet up with them in the town of Lucca at exactly 1300 local. He should be fueled and ready to roll. Andy wants to do this right, and she wants to make sure that these men learn their lesson. We then switch over to Afghanistan. It's a very hot and dry afternoon, and the US Army is currently in a local village looking for a terrorist. The men and the boys of the village are being separately searched according to the local customs, while soldiers go check every house to ensure there aren't any unforeseen threats. This is when a young female soldier named Nile Freeman is summoned by her sergeant. They have just found a house where all the women and girls of the village are holed up, which is why, to uphold the traditions and customs of the people, Nile will be the one taking charge now. She is accompanied by two more female soldiers, Stacey Ann and Dizzy. As they make their way into the house, they find dozens of women and girls huddled in a corner, expecting the worst. Many of them are scared, some of them are confused, while most of the older women have steeled themselves, expecting the worst. However, as soon as Nile, Stacey and Dizzy enter the room, they do their best to ease their worries. Nile starts by greeting them in their own language and then assures them that they are here just to talk and gather some information. She then introduces herself, tells them that she is part of the US Marines and that she and the other two soldiers need to search their home. This is when one of the older women speaks up. It is a huge invasion of privacy to enter someone's home, especially in this region, let alone search it without permission. She then bluntly asks Nile, "Why do you gather our men and search our homes?" Tensions can quickly rise in such situations, which is why Nile decides to come clean and explain to them why she and the other Marines are actually here. She pulls out a photograph from her front pocket and tells the women that they are hunting a man who is responsible for killing a lot of American and Afghanistani citizens alike. The Marines believe that the man is somewhere here, hiding in this village, which is why she, Stacey and Dizzy are here to search their home. Nile then hands over the photograph to the woman and asks her if she has seen this face before. Of course, the woman outright denies seeing the man, but her face screams the opposite. Horror and terror washes over it as she takes a step forward and says to Nile in hushed tones, "No, there are no men here, and a man who would cower behind women, who puts them in danger and uses them as shields. He is no man at all." As she is saying this, the woman constantly stares at a door at the back of their home, and Nile quickly gets the message. She thanks the woman for her honesty and help and tells her that they will now leave. However, while saying this, the women are backing away from the metal door in question, while Nile, Stacey and Dizzy approach it stealthily with their rifles in hand. Nile then says, "Blessings on your house," and takes aim. Stacey steadies herself and gets ready to kick down the door. However, this is when tons of bullets are fired at them with the door still closed, and this catches them off guard. The three of them quickly gather themselves and order the man inside to stop instantly once the door falls away. This is the same man that they were looking for, and he has clearly been busy, considering the paraphernalia and weapons that adorn his workbench. Instead of following Nile's orders, the man arms himself with a rifle, and this is when Nile is forced to pull the trigger and shoot him through the chest. Stacey and Dizzy check and clear the adjoining rooms, while the consequences of shooting the man suddenly dawn on Nile. She starts by ordering Stacey to inform the sergeant about what has happened, so that he doesn't assume the worst, and she then proceeds to remove bandages from her emergency first aid kit. Dizzy, on the other hand, is quite excited. The three of them managed to capture this guy that they had been searching for all this time, all on their own. However, this is when Nile reminds her that he will be of no use to them if he bleeds out. She then places the bandage on his wound and begins to apply pressure. However, this is when the man begins to squirm. He screams for Nile not to touch him because, though Nile is trying to save his life, from his perspective, Nile is preventing him from entering heaven. He refuses to understand her pleas, and as she struggles to keep him under control, she fails to notice him reaching into his robes. She turns around and demands that Dizzy help her. However, this is when the man swiftly uses the hidden knife to slice her neck. The cut is deep and clean, and blood begins to spray in every direction as Dizzy rushes to her friend's aid. Within seconds, Nile's eyes are rolling in the back of her head. Her breathing is slowing down until finally a narrowing tunnel of empty darkness leads her to an empty void from which she will never return. We then catch up with Andy, Joe, Nikki, and Booker. They are aboard a helicopter in South Sudan, dressed from head to toe in tactical gear and armed to the teeth. The four of them aren't talking. They're simply contemplating and preparing themselves for what is to come next. However, Andy's briefing from earlier that day still echoes in everyone's mind. Andy told them how this was a rescue mission, how they were facing high numbers with limited combat training, and how the men are holed up in the hostages with a former warlord's bunker that is roughly 70 kilometers northeast of Mariai Bai. There will be little to no resistance outside the bunker, but once they are inside, Andy tells them to expect a tough fight. Her and her crew's motivation? 17 hostages, all girls. The oldest is 13, while the youngest is 8. And if there's one thing Andy is adamant about, it's that they are going to get all of the girls out of there, alive and well. They are being piloted to the location by Wei, someone who has been regularly working with them for the past few years. Wei is trustworthy and a great pilot. He flies them towards the bunker, and when they are around 2 clicks away from it, he lands. Andy and her crew will now make the rest of the journey on foot, while Wei goes back to Mariai Bai and gets their exfiltration transport ready. Andy and her crew start walking, and as planned, by nightfall, they are outside the bunker. The perimeter is only guarded by a single guard, and as he nonchalantly lights a smoke, thinking that tonight's going to be like any other night, he gets shot through the head. Seconds later, Andy, Joe, Nikki, and Booker are on the premises, and after encountering no more resistance, they quickly make their way to the bunker. Booker rigs it with explosives while the rest of them stand guard, and a minute later, the bunker door is blasted open. Andy and her crew rush in and walk down into the bunker, but surprisingly, the explosion attracts no one. Once they are inside, however, Andy is horrified to learn that it is completely empty. The others begin speculating about what might have occurred here, but Andy quickly orders them to check the bunker to ensure that they haven't walked into an ambush. However, this is when all the doors in the facility are swung open, and at least a few dozen men rush out to take them down. They are armed to the teeth, and Andy was right. This is indeed an ambush. But before she or the others can jump into action, the men open fire, and within seconds, their bodies are riddled with hundreds of bullets. Andy has part of her skull blown away, while Joe has his right eye hanging out of its socket by the ocular nerves. The men think that the job is done, but little do they know, their demise has only just begun. Joe and Andy smile as their bodies quickly regenerate, and then it's their turn to pull the trigger. They start dodging, firing and weaving through the horde, and within seconds, blood and guts are flying in different directions. Andy is hungry for revenge, which is why she uses her ancient labries to take out the last remaining men. Once the job is done, she orders Joe to check the rooms. However, this is when Booker calls out to her because he has just found a video camera that has seemingly recorded this entire ordeal. Andy quickly curses Copley and rips the cable out of the camera, while Joe and Nikki inform her that the rest of the facility is completely empty and there is no sign of the girls ever being here in the first place. But Andy isn't surprised one bit. She has figured out this situation and has realised that the girls being here was a made-up story to lure them here in the first place. She grabs the camera and tosses it to Nikki while ordering him to delete and destroy the tapes. However, this is when Booker informs them that the problem is much bigger than they had anticipated. The cable that Andy ripped out was a direct satellite connection, which means that the camera was broadcasting live, and whoever was watching them likely has everything recorded at a remote location far from here. They've been made, and this is when we see Andy speechless for the first time. Back in Afghanistan, meanwhile, Dizzy and Stacy are having an argument. Stacy thinks that Dizzy is simply making up stories. She doesn't believe her fellow soldiers, but Dizzy is adamant that she knows what she saw. Stacy tries to justify Dizzy's supposed delusions by telling her that even a small cut on the neck can lead to a lot of blood loss, and that she should be happy that their friend Nile has survived the entire ordeal. Stacy then walks into the medical ward while leaving Dizzy behind, who tries to tell her what she experienced. Dizzy was holding Nile when she bled out. Dizzy was horrified because she saw her friend die in her arms. Minutes later, they catch up with Nile in her hospital bed, who looks as good as before. She is chirpy and happy to see her friends and her neck. It is as pristine as it ever was, with no signs of a scar. The Old Guard, Volume 1, Opening Fire, Issue Number 2, What's the Point? Now that the job is done, and Andy is confined to the constraints of a safe house in the middle of the night, her past is here to haunt her once again. She uses this opportunity to tell us about Noriko, someone Andy adores, whom she met during the 6th and 7th centuries AD. At the time, Andy was riding with Emir bin Alaz against the Byzantine Empire, and that's when she met Noriko. Andy had been dreaming of Noriko for years, but had never managed to find her. But that finally changed when she and Emir bin Alaz and his men rolled into Alexandria. While the treaty between the two warring forces was being signed, Andy finally spotted Noriko. In Andy's own words, Noriko was smart, fearless, and a pit viper when it came to a fight. Andy had never seen anyone as quick as Noriko, and that still hasn't changed after thousands of years. Unfortunately, Andy lost Noriko to a raging storm during which she was thrown overboard into the sea to never be seen again. They tried searching for her, but when Noriko didn't resurface, she knew that was the end for Noriko. Andy now remembers Lycon, another immortal she met during her life. Andy and Lycon met each other when Alexander conquered Judea. Thankfully for them, the two had only been dreaming about each other for a few weeks, and luckily they ended up meeting each other at the same place at the same time. Andy and Lycon were together for 2,000 years. When you spend that much time with someone, your relationship grows past hate and love. You end up having something bigger, something more substantial. Andy had seen Lycon get mortally injured thousands of times, yet his immortality came to an end during the Renaissance. This time, when Lycon was injured, he didn't regenerate, he didn't heal, he simply died, and in his last moments, Andy could see that he looked relieved. Lycon was relieved that his life was finally over. She then reminisces about her current crew, the only 3 immortals now on Earth: Joe, Nikki, and Booker. Booker is the youngest of them, only 200 years old, which makes him a baby in Andy's book. Nikki and Joe, however, are 1,000 years old, and, unlike Andy's encounters, the two of them met each other by chance during the First Crusade. The others, like Andy, always had to search for each other. Hell, Andy didn't even know what all the dreams meant at first. She thought she was going crazy. She thought she was losing her mind, having the same images repeat over and over again in her dreams, and they weren't even distinct at first, just bits and pieces of information that she had to put together. And even when Andy did figure out what the dreams meant years later, there was still the problem of finding the person. For example, it took her the better part of a century to find Noriko, but Nikki and Joe's case was different. They practically landed at each other's throats during the First Crusade, fighting for opposite sides. Nikki's name was Niccolo back then, and Joe's name was Yusuf, and the two of them met on the battlefield, not knowing the other, and not caring enough to even register each other's faces at first. We see Joe and Nikki fighting each other fiercely on the battlefield, trading blow after blow, with neither of them showing any signs of giving up. Joe slashes Nikki's stomach, which spills out his guts, and in retaliation with his dying breath, Nikki plunges his sword directly through Joe's heart. And this is when the two of them discovered that they both were immortal, because neither of them was able to keep the other one down and dead. That night, once the battle was over, once the field was littered with the stench of dead bodies and rotting corpses, something stirred back to life. The sound of coarse breathing echoed through the dead night sky, and eventually both Joe and Nikki woke up and started fighting each other once again. They stabbed each other, gnawed each other's faces. Hell, at one point Nikki even smashed Joe's head in with a rock, but the result was the same. After a few hours of recuperating and lying beside each other, they woke up until life eventually forced them to realize and accept the truth, a truth that for them has now blossomed into a love beyond normal human understanding. Nikki and Joe are lying in each other's arms as they rest for the night, and as Andy stares at them, she calls them extremely lucky for not only having found each other out of the blue, but also for having fallen in love for all of eternity. Andy smokes as she contemplates and reminisces about her past, while her trusty Labrys lies beside her. Her narration through this tells us that Andy is the eldest of them all. She has never met anyone older than herself, and it's the reason why she leads the crew. They all know she has the most experience, and it's the reason why Andy took the job, to keep them all safe. Except this time, she fucked up. After this last botched job, she is sure Copley knows about them and their immortality, and she fears what is to come next, and what Copley plans on doing with the evidence in his hands. This is when Wei enters the room and informs Andy that the plane is prepped and ready for takeoff. As per Andy's request, Wei has also rigged the Huey, aka their helicopter, the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, to blow as soon as they take off, and Andy thanks him for his help and promises to drop some extra cash into his account for all the extra troubles due to the last job. Andy and the rest of them have known Wei for about 5 years now. To Wei, they are almost like family, fair employers that always take care of him, which is why he tells Andy that he doesn't need the extra cash. They have always done right by him, which is more than he could have ever hoped for. Wei then decides to take a nap before it's time to leave, and this is when Andy's narration tells us that this will be the crew's last job with Wei. 5 years is nothing to Andy and the rest of the crew, but to Wei, it's a lot of time, and it won't take long for him to start asking questions. Questions that are uncomfortable, questions that neither of them would want to answer. Andy then lies down for the night to catch up on some much-needed sleep, and before she drifts into the land of dreams, she tells us that the past was different. The Immortals had it easier back then. They had much more time on their hands before they had to cut people off, and they didn't have to worry as much about being found out. But modern times are tough, which has made Andy doubt herself. Andy says, "These days, either I'm getting slow or the world is moving too damn fast." And this is when Andy falls asleep, but instead of dreams, visions haunt her. Visions of a fallen soldier, visions of an American flag, visions of a woman in hijab, and visions of a medical chopper racing through the air. We see that these visions are shared by the rest of her crew as well. Nikki winces in pain as he feels Nile's pain from across the continent, but the visions continue. Joe sees part of Nile's name tag. He can read the word free on it, and he too winces in pain and horror as he watches Nile get her throat sliced by the terrorist. Andy instantly wakes up while gasping for air and clutching her throat. It's clear that her dreams ended with the same vision as well, and once up, she realizes that Booker is already awake while Joe and Nikki are just waking up from their own nightmares. The Immortals always share the same vision when a new one appears on Earth, and so, without any of them even uttering a single word, everyone knows what this means. But for Andy, this is a huge hurdle that she didn't want to cross, especially not when Copley knows their secret. She kicks a nearby box and screams at the top of her lungs, but the others pay no attention to her. They know Andy loses it regularly, and this time she has every right to be mad. Booker, meanwhile, casually lights a cigarette, while Joe pulls out his iPad to note down details from their visions that will help them track down the new Immortal. Booker starts by telling them about the Medvac helicopter, which was a Huey, and this is when Joe says that he managed to see a part of their new member's name and that it read free. Nikki tells them about the woman in a hijab, which leads them to believe that the location could be Afghanistan. However, when they question Andy about the details she saw, they get an answer they had never expected from her. Andy simply says no, and when they probe her further, Andy angrily lashes out and screams, "No, damn it! We're not doing this, guys. Not right now. Not with what Copley has on us." Andy goes on to say that the new Immortal can sit and wait until they get this mess sorted out. However, this is when she ends up slipping and refers to the Immortal as her, and this tells the rest of them that the new Immortal is a girl. Andy then calms down, grabs another smoke, and calmly tells them all that they need to take care of Copley before he tries to use the video footage against them. However, this is when, for the first time, Nikki disagrees with Andy as he tells her that she is wrong. If Copley manages to capture them all, or worse, then the new Immortal would be left out to fend off against the world on her own, and neither of them truly wants that, despite how they all might feel. Joe then joins in and points out the worst possibility. What if Copley or someone else ends up getting to her before they do? What if the army already knows about her, considering that she is likely part of the forces? What happens then? This is when Andy leans on her authority as the leader. They chose her as their leader for a reason, and that reason is that they all trust Andy to keep them safe, which is exactly what Andy is trying to do here. According to her, if they take a detour to bring the new Immortal on board, then they will only be handing Copley a bigger target to hit. This is when Nikki calmly says to her, "But if we don't do that, then we'll be even more compromised than we already are. Everything happens for a reason, boss." And this finally makes Andy reconsider, and as she lights another cigarette, she tells them all the details she was able to spot during her visions. Andy's visions were much clearer, considering she's the oldest. She tells them that the girl they're looking for is black. She got her throat sliced by a knife that was peshkabs, which makes it Pashtun, which makes Afghanistan the location that they are looking for. This means that they're looking for an American woman serving in Afghanistan as a Marine. These details are more than enough for Booker. He will now be able to track her down easily, and Andy orders him to get the job done ASAP. She'll be carrying out the retrieval on her own, and Andy will catch up with them in their Charlie safe house in Paris. This is when we travel to the other side of the world to catch up with Copley. He is currently showing the footage to the pharmaceutical tycoon Stephen Merrick as he exercises. Stephen is the one who is currently funding Copley's ventures now that he is out of the FBI, and he is currently pissed off because the video recorded by Copley has no sound. This could have been easily faked by a 10th grader. Copley tries to justify the footage by telling Merrick that it was a technical glitch and that these kinds of things do happen in the real world. However, this is when Merrick lashes out at Copley, and we learn that he is quite short-tempered and violent for a man of his stature and standing in society. Merrick, however, soon changes his tone and tells Copley that to him, video evidence doesn't mean anything. What he needs is real evidence, physical evidence, like a body or a blood sample. And though Copley tries to tell him that there was too much blood on site to get a clean sample, Copley is clearly not getting Merrick's point. The billionaire then once again changes his tone and accuses Copley of swindling him out of $3 million. After all Copley has done with that money is produce a low-grade snuff film for him. Copley tries to defend himself by reminding Merrick of all the research that he has shown him, all the research that he has carried out over the last 8 years. All the eyewitness accounts that he has gathered, all the image comparisons he has found that go back to the 1850s, the physical descriptions and more. But this is when Merrick rudely asks Copley to shut up. He then wipes the sweat off his face, and like a psychopath, his mood does a 180 once again. He grabs Copley by the shoulders and, while laughing, he says, "I believe you, Copley. You wouldn't be here if I didn't. Stop trying to sell me something I already brought, okay?" He then orders Copley to bring him one of the Immortals. He doesn't care which one, but he wants one of them, and he doesn't care how difficult this job might be. Merrick then directs Copley to his chief security officer, Kylie, who is under explicit orders to provide Merrick with everything that he needs to finish this job. That night in Afghanistan, we see that Nile is still haunted by her encounter a day ago. Did she really die? How did she recover so fast? And as she gets out of the shower, Nile inspects her neck, and to her surprise, she doesn't even have a scar to prove that someone might have slit her throat only a day or two ago. As she walks out of the showers, Andy calls out to her and asks her name. Naturally, Nile is on her toes, and she refuses to answer Andy, and this is when the latter shines her flashlight at her to read her name tag. It says Freeman, and Andy gets the confirmation that she needs. This is when Nile angrily asks Andy who she is, and this is when Andy tells Nile her real name. She says, "Andronica the Scythian, but you can call me Andy." Before Nile can ask any more questions, Andy closes the distance between them instantly and knocks out Nile with her flashlight. When Nile wakes up next, she realizes that she is in the middle of nowhere, while Andy sits melancholically on a rock beside her, staring at the stars. As Nile comes back to her senses, Andy blatantly questions her about her death. Everyone thought she was dead, and Andy goes on to explain in excruciating detail how that came to happen. She even outlines the experience of dying for Nile, and this is when the latter begins to pay more attention to Andy's words. Andy goes on to say, "Never mind what your friends thought, you were sure that you were dead. But then when you woke up, you assumed that maybe the wound wasn't fatal. You thought you got lucky. That's likely what you're thinking or what your friends and doctors are telling you, and this is when the dreams would have started for you." Andy then goes on to outline the dreams Nile might have had in the past day or so, how she might have dreamt over and over again about the same three guys, or even Andy herself. Andy then pulls out a gun and directly asks Nile, "You see me in your dreams, Freeman?" And this is when Nile snarls and replies, "I've never seen you before in my life." In retaliation, Andy lifts up her arm, takes aim, and then shoots Nile directly in the head while claiming that they no longer have time for this. And so, sometime later, when Nile's wound has healed and her body has recovered, she once again wakes up with no scars and no signs of her ever being shot in the head. Despite this, she has a throbbing headache, and Andy tells her that this is to be expected. She then goes on to say, "Took you long enough. It's so fucking slow the first couple of times." But Nile isn't listening to her. She is in shock. Nile knows she is supposed to be dead. In fact, She is dead, isn't she? And this is when Andy reassures her that she isn't, and then goes to apologise to Nile for shooting her in the head. It was the best way to save time and explain everything to Nile without having to answer too many questions. She then offers Nile her hand while telling her that she is willing to answer all of Nile's questions, but that they will have to do so while they travel because time is of the essence. All of this, however, is too much for Nile. She begins to panic and scream and tries desperately to crawl away from Andy. Andy, finding no other alternative, lays it out for Nile. She tells her that neither can she die, nor can Andy. Andy then takes out her pistol, points it at her chest, and then shoots herself. Andy's recovery is a lot faster than Nile's, and as her body repairs itself, she assures Nile that she isn't alone, and for the first time, Nile seems to sympathise with Andy. After all, why would someone willingly shoot themselves in the chest? Andy, however, has been referring to Nile as Freeman all this time, and this is when she decides to correct Andy. She tells Andy that her name is Nile, and thus, without a word, they get in Andy's Humvee and take off into the night. As they make their way through Afghanistan, fly their way out of the country, and eventually make their way to Paris, we see all the questions Nile asks Andy. She first starts by asking Andy the most important questions. Why did this happen? And how did this happen? Two questions that have haunted all of the immortals Andy has ever met in her life, and unfortunately, neither of them nor Andy has a definite answer to these questions. Next, Nile asks Andy about the rest of the immortals, and Andy tells her that there are 5 of them now, including her. Andy then goes on to explain to Nile that they aren't truly immortal. They regenerate and recover, but there comes a time when an immortal can die. No one knows when or why this time comes, but it does come for all of them. You can spend your life taking gunshots to the head and falling out of skyscrapers, but then suddenly one day you will fall off a horseback, break your neck, and never recover again. By this question, Andy and Nile are on a plane flying out of the country, and Nile has been staring at the photographs of her family ever since she boarded. This is when the question about Andy's age comes up, and she simply tells Nile that she is very old enough to have lost count, and old enough to have forgotten all the people that once loved her. This is when Andy grabs Nile's phone and smashes it underfoot to ensure she can't contact anyone and blow their cover. Nile, clearly perturbed by the thought of losing her family, lashes out and says, "Yeah, well, the people who loved me still do. They're gonna wonder where I am. They're gonna think I'm AWOL." And this is when Andy coldly replies, "They'll survive," and Nile retorts, "The hell with that. You can't expect me to just forget them." And with a cold expression on her face, Andy says, "If you really do love them, then that's the first thing you'll do. Forget them, for their sake, if not yours." By now, Nile and Andy have landed in Paris, and Andy is quietly leading the new recruit to their established safe house in the city. Nile wants to ask more questions, but Andy tells her to save them for later, especially the ones that concern Nile abandoning her family. Nile, however, doesn't give up. Andy has left many unanswered questions, but she needs some answers now. Why the hell is she supposed to give up on her family? Why should she leave her loved ones behind? And as Andy opens the door to her safe house, she simply tells Nile that the best person to answer that question would be Booker, and that she should ask him about his family once they meet. Nile doesn't press Andy more on the matter, and instead expresses her discontent by insulting the current condition of their warehouse, which is frankly deplorable. Andy doesn't mind it. These are safe houses, not luxury retreats and holiday homes. They need to be functional and safe, which they are. She goes on to tell Nile about the other dozen or so safe houses that they have all over Europe, and that they don't tend to stay in one place for long. Nile finds it depressing that they don't have a home, but she is quickly distracted by the panic in Andy's voice when the latter discovers that the door to their safe house is wide open. Andy quickly rushes inside, only to find Booker's body lying among shards of broken glass and empty bullet casings. When we get a proper look at it, it seems Booker is as good as dead. Half of his face has been blown away, and there are no signs of life in his body. The Old Guard, Volume 1, Opening Fire, Issue Number 3, Unearthing Corpses. Staring at Booker's mangled body and half-blown-off face isn't doing Nile any good, not after all that she has been told over the past day or so. Andy, on the other hand, is quite proactive, and she immediately asks Nile to close the door ASAP. Nile, however, is too dumbfounded to register Andy's request, which is why she is forced to scream, and Nile finally registers her request and closes the door door while still holding her mouth closed with one hand. Andy, however, fears the worst. She is hoping that Booker is not dead, but he is taking awfully long to heal. Andy tells us that she would be seriously pissed off if Booker ends up dying like this next to Nile. He is the youngest of them all, and if he ends up dying like this, it would be so unfair. He would have been alive for only 2 centuries at most, and compared to Andy's life, that's nothing. Andy then sticks her hand in Booker's huge wound while assuring Nile that larger wounds sometimes take longer to heal. However, by now, Andy's concern for Booker has turned into contempt and jealousy. Why does he get to die and not her? This is when Andy's narration gives us Booker's backstory and how he found out that he was immortal. Booker was born French, and he was part of Napoleon's army when the latter marched into Russia with his 700,000 men. Booker, or as he was known back then, Sébastien Lelièvre, was one of these men, and even before the war had begun, he was miserable, though modern historians believe that Napoleon never had a plan of attack when attacking the Russians. Andy and the rest of them knew better. Napoleon did have a plan. He knew the ruthlessness of the Russian winter, which is why his plan was to billet in Smolensk. However, Napoleon's mistake, which was the same one that Hitler made years later, was the fact that neither of them accounted for the depth and breadth of the Russian hatred. Andy tells us that the Russians can hate like no other people on the surface of this planet, and she knows this best because they are in part descended from her people. And we see, as Napoleon's army and Booker reach Smolensk, they find the city burned and ransacked to the ground already. The Russians were ruthless enough to cut their own throats, starve their own children, and burn their cities to the ground, rather than giving the enemy a win. They simply kept retreating while razing their cities and villages to the ground, and Napoleon's forces followed their tracks with nothing to find on their way. No food, no water, no shelter, and definitely no prisoners. This is all the Russians did, and they let winter finish the rest of the job. By the time Napoleon realized that he had made a great mistake by leading his army into Russia, it was already too late. Most of his men, like Booker, had realized this way before him, which is why Booker had tried to desert them. But Napoleon needed to maintain control. The army needed some kind of order, and the men were itching for some action. Booker was chased down by dozens of soldiers, tied to one of the horses, and then dragged back into camp. Booker had pleaded guilty to desertion in hopes of a lenient punishment, but the whole army was falling apart by then, and Napoleon needed to make an example out of all the deserters. And thus, Booker was hanged with the rest of the deserters, and his corpse was left out to rot and freeze amidst the harsh Russian winter. However, Booker soon came back to life, but thankfully, he was smart enough to play dead while the army was still there. He hung there for 3 days before the army eventually left, and by now, Booker was starving more than ever. And so, when the crows thought they had found food, they didn't realize that Booker had found them instead. We then see Booker grabbing one of the crows with his hands and biting into its raw flesh with his bare teeth. Andy is now back to being concerned about Booker once again. After all, she and the rest of them depend on his skills heavily. What will they do if Booker is gone? He is the only one of them really able to keep up with the changing times. The only one of them who understands computers, phones, and modern transportation. Andy, now fearing the worst, decides to close Booker's open, lifeless eyes. However, this is when he breathes heavily and pushes Andy's hand away. He isn't dead, and this supposed corpse coming back to life with half of its head still missing scares the hell out of Nile. Booker himself lets out a huge groan because his head hurts a lot, and this is when he asks Andy, "How bad is it?" And she jokes, "Honestly, it's an improvement." Booker chuckles, and this is when Andy offers him a hand while asking him what the hell happened in the safe house. Booker's head has begun to rapidly heal now, while Nile and Andy lead him to the bedroom. He tells them that he and Joe were watching a PSG match while lounging on the couch, while Nikki was in the kitchen preparing everyone a meal. Suddenly, the door was flung wide open. Dozens of soldiers marched in with guns drawn, and before Hooker could react, a flashbang that was tossed ended up in his lap. Booker doesn't remember what happened after that. All he remembers is waking up while Andy tried to close his eyes. This is when Andy asks about Nikki and Joe, and it doesn't take long for all of them to come to the conclusion that the two were kidnapped. Andy speculates that the soldiers might have thought that Booker was dead, which is why they left him behind. However, this is when it dawns on her and Booker that if the soldiers knew they were immortals, then Booker wasn't left behind for no reason. He was left behind as bait. Andy quickly draws her gun, and she orders Nile and Booker to wait for her signal as she exits the apartment. Nile is confused by this. What does Andy mean by wait for the signal? What is the signal going to be? And how will they know that it is the signal that they are looking for? Booker then reassures her that everything will play out just fine and to trust Andy. Andy, meanwhile, rushes down the stairs, and once she has reached the 5th floor, she spots the soldiers already making their way up while ensuring that each floor is clear of any dangers. This is when Andy is reminded of the old days. There was a time when you could blend into the shadows, move when the people started noticing and whispering, but now the world has gotten a lot smaller, and this is when the apartment door beside her opens, and an old woman peeks out to check on the commotion. Andy spots her, and so does she, and this is when we switch to the soldiers. They are on their toes, clearly perturbed by the briefing and the nature of their enemies. And though they are doing everything in their power to keep a handle on the situation, one of them quickly gets shot in the head by Andy. She's using a silenced pistol, which is why, by the time the second soldier turns around, he too gets taken out. Andy had hid in the old woman's apartment, and now that the scouting party has been taken out, it's time for Andy to stealthily take out the main party. Next, Andy pushes the pistol against the old woman's head and warns her that she will come back and kill her if she tries to alert the authorities. Andy then leaves the woman's apartment. However, once she is gone, the old woman begins to scream in order to alert the soldiers on the floor below. Andy curses herself, but then decides to let it go. After all, she never intended to kill the old woman in the first place. It was a hollow threat, and somehow, people like her always know when Andy is bluffing. Thus, as soon as Andy hears the old woman's cries, it is followed by dozens of bullets beelining for her from the floors below. The soldiers are now aware of her presence, but Andy is a veteran when it comes to doing things on the fly, and thus, instead of retreating or finding cover, she rushes down the stairs and begins shooting at the soldiers. I mean, what's the most they can do to her? Shoot her? Andy will heal within seconds, and her body will keep healing until they run out of bullets. When Andy is face to face with the soldiers, she leaps into the air and does a front flip to close the distance, and when she lands, she begins firing again. Don't get me wrong, the soldiers have been firing at her all this time. It's only that Andy doesn't care about the bullets piercing her skin. After killing the first 2 soldiers standing in her way, Andy grabs the third one, uses him as a human shield, and then slams his face against the railing before ultimately breaking his neck using her elbow. Back in the safe house, Nile is having the worst time of her life. She is panicking. After all, despite being a soldier stationed in Afghanistan, she has never heard this many guns going off in a civilian setting. What's worse to her is the fact that Andy is alone out there. How can she handle so many men on her own? And thus, Nile is practically at the door, begging Booker to hurry up so that they can leave instantly and help Andy out. But Booker is as calm as a clam in the summer sea, taking his own sweet time to dress up as he tells Nile to relax. After all, Andy told them to wait for her signal, and this commotion isn't the signal that they have been looking for. Explosions and gunfire continue to rock the entire apartment building, and Nile continues to beg Booker to hurry up, but the latter continues to wait for Andy's mysterious signal, while Andy finally breaks and screams, "How the hell will we know when it's time?" And this is when a huge explosion rocks their apartment and blows out their windows. Furniture and other debris are flung in every direction, and this is when Booker smiles and tells Nile that this is the signal that they were looking for. The 2 of them then leave the safe house, and Nile is horrified by the massacre that awaits them outside. However, this is something Booker has seen 1,000 times before, and he simply reassures Nile that this is normal, as he says, "Yeah, this happens. You do not want to get in Andy's way when she's got a mad on." He then grabs a rifle from one of the dead soldiers and tosses it over to Nile. She checks the ammo, cocks it, and then arms herself. Nile is clearly shaken to her core, but she is ready for whatever comes next, and this clearly impresses Booker. Nile will fit right in with them. As they leave the building, we see multiple cars riddled with hundreds of bullets on fire in the street. Seconds later, a speeding Audi comes to a screeching halt near them, and Andy orders them to get in. The gendarmes are likely on their way here, and Andy wants to get out of town before they are discovered. Nile sarcastically says, "Duh, not only them, the fire department and the ambulances are likely on their way as well. Hell, if we're lucky, they won't send the army after us." And this is when Andy jokes that it's the French army, they won't be much of a fight, and Booker doesn't take kindly to this remark. The three of them drive away into the night, and this is when we catch up with Nikki and Joe. As you might have guessed, this is another huge difference between the comics and the movie. In the movie, to raise the stakes, Andy loses her ability to regenerate and heal during this fight. However, nothing of the sort happens in the comics. Joe is conscious, but Nikki is still passed out on the floor of the armoured truck transporting them. They are surrounded by soldiers, and despite knowing better, Joe can't help but reach out to his lover. He is scared for Nikki. He wants to know if he's doing all right, and though the soldiers beside him try to intimidate him and order him to stay quiet, Joe continues to call out to his partner. Nikki finally wakes up and reassures Joe that he is okay, and this is when Joe informs him that they have been kidnapped and are currently being transported in an armoured truck. The soldier beside Joe has had enough. He points his rifle to Joe's head and screams, "Oh, that's sweet. You checking up on him. What is he? Your boyfriend?" And this is where one of the most iconic lines of the old guard comes in, one where Joe explains his love for Nikki to the world, a line that was replicated word for word in the movies, and thus to do it justice, we will quote Joe's exact words as well. Joe turns to the soldier with an expression of disgust and pity on his face as he says, "You are a child, an infant, and your mocking is thus infantile. That man is not my boyfriend. That man is more to me than you can dream in your simpering, pathetic life. That man is the stars in my sky, and the sun that lights my days. That man is the moon when I'm lost in darkness and warmth, when I shiver in cold. I love that man beyond measure and reason. His kiss still thrills me, even after a millennium since I first tasted him. His body, to this day, awakens a passion you will never know. His heart overflows with a kindness of which this world is not worthy. His very thoughts make music of the mundane. He is not my boyfriend. He is not my lover, nor is he my partner. He is all and more. He is my everything." These words, however, elicit an aggressive and violent reaction from the soldiers, and to hammer the final nail in the coffin, Joe leaps up from his seat and then kisses Nikki on the lips, while every soldier around them gets ready to pull both of them apart. Sometime later, the armoured truck arrives at a remote airport where Kylie is already waiting to receive their two prisoners. However, when he and his men open the door, they are horrified to learn that Joe and Nikki managed to take out all of the soldiers that were escorting them. Nikki and Joe joke and laugh as they are forced out of the truck, and through their sarcastic remarks, we learn that the only reason they didn't escape is that neither of the soldiers was carrying keys that would unlock their handcuffs. Copley is there to receive them as well, and as soon as Nikki lays his eyes on the man, he begins to berate him for betraying them. Copley retorts by saying that things would have been a lot easier for all of them if they had told him about their immortality. However, this is when Joe laughs loudly, because everyone knows that doing that would only have expedited Copley and his employer's plans. This is when Nikki outright tells Copley that he and his employer aren't going to find what they're looking for, no matter what they do to him and Joe. Copley retorts by informing Nikki that his employer is highly motivated and that they would be surprised by what he can achieve. This is when Nikki says, "Joseph and I have no illusions about what's going to happen to us. Even if we wanted to, we won't be able to help him. But that leaves me with a question for you. What happens when your employer's frustration inevitably outmatches his greed?" Copley is left speechless after this retort. After all, what will happen when Merrick doesn't get what he wants? What will he do to Copley? And how will Copley survive what's coming for him if what Nikki says is true? We then head to France again and catch up with Andy, Booker and Nile as their car speeds through the outskirts of Les Beaux-de-Provence. Nile tries to ask Andy where she's taking them, but like always, Andy decides to keep it a secret because, according to her, it's safer this way. Realising that she isn't going to get a straight answer from Andy, she decides to ask Booker about his family instead, just like Andy had instructed her. Booker starts by telling Nile that getting in touch with her family will risk exposing them all, but there's another bigger reason why she shouldn't do so. He lights a smoke and tells Nile, "The real reason why you shouldn't contact them is to protect your heart. You will watch all of them die, Nile. You will watch everyone you have loved pass away away eventually, and if you try to touch their lives, they will ask questions, and through your answers, they will learn your secret, and they will ask you to share it with them, and unfortunately, you won't be able to. And so, they will curse your name, they will beg, they will implore, and they will not believe you when you say you cannot help them. And so they will grow desperate, and in desperation, they will do things to forever taint your memory of them, and they will still die, and you will never forget what they became before they did. After this, the three of them spend the rest of the drive in silence before finally arriving at their destination. It's a hidden bunker that Andy found during the Bosonke Wars in the 1950s. Andy and Booker push the stuck door to open the bunker, and Andy is mesmerized by all the ancient artifacts that Andy has stashed here. The Old Guard, Volume 1, Opening Fire, Issue Number 4, The Hunger for an End. It is a lonely morning for Nile as she stares into the distance from a cliffside. Tears stream down her face as thoughts of leaving her family behind haunt her. Her brother, her mother, her boyfriend, her friends. How is Nile supposed to leave them behind? But immortality, as she has come to learn in the past few days, is more of a curse than a gift. What is eternal life without love? Without your loved ones? Without your family? A few minutes later, Andy joins her and lights her cigarette, and as Nile ponders over these thoughts, Andy's narration tells us that time always wins. It takes it all, and there's no way to fight it. As you live for decades and centuries, your memories are snatched away by time. They deform, amalgamate, and then mash into each other to create a mirror image of something or someone you once held close to your heart. Andy then tries to give Nile some hope by telling her that each day from now is just going to be another day, unless Nile decides to make something of it. She then asks to look at Nile's photo of her brother and mother, and Andy takes this chance to remind Nile that she is lucky. Because Andy, unfortunately, doesn't remember her mother anymore. She doesn't remember her face or the faces of her sisters. Sometimes she thinks she does. Sometimes she's sure it's her mother's face. But deep down, Andy knows that it's more imagination than memory. Nile is lucky to have photographs. All Nikki, Joe and Andy have of their loved ones is simply their memories they are losing with each passing day. She then lovingly inserts Nile's picture back into her front pocket while asking her to cherish her memories and to make sure that she keeps their photographs in a safe place. Nile decides to go back to the safe house for breakfast, and Andy takes this moment to spend some time at the cliffside and reminisce about the past once again. This is when she introduces us to Achilles. Andy has forgotten many people over the past thousands of years. People that she loved, people that loved her, but the one person she hasn't forgotten is Achilles. Achilles wasn't his real name. He was called that because it was the name given to him by his owner. He joined the American Revolution when the British offered freedom to any slaves who would fight for them. It was a good deal in Achilles' books, but that's until the British lost the fight. And when he made his way to London with all the retreating troops, he found out that the British were as bad as the Americans. He was as welcome in London as he was in Virginia, which meant he wasn't welcome at all. And so, when Achilles stole food to feed his starving stomach one day, he was arrested and then put on a ship full of prisoners bound for Australia. Some of these prisoners bolted as soon as they got off the ship, never to be seen again, and some became bandits. Some of the first bushrangers, born in the West Indies, sold into the colonies, fled to London, and then condemned to the penal colony of New South Wales. That was the life of Achilles before he met Andy. He was bathing under a waterfall when Andy showed up and held him at gunpoint, and even though Achilles was completely naked and helpless, he somehow managed to quickly grab his own gun and point it at Andy. Their standoff ended with partnership and love. Andy was a bounty hunter back then. She didn't care about her bounties back then, but Achilles was different, and thus the two began their life as outlaws, fell in love with each other, and eventually built themselves a quaint little farm in the middle of nowhere. Achilles made Andy feel alive again. She wanted to live again, and she wanted to live this time so that she could stay with Achilles. A lot could have gone wrong for them. A lot should have gone wrong, but somehow it didn't. For once, life pitied Andy and Achilles, and it let them have the perfect life they craved. Eventually, Achilles grew old, and though Andy had feared the worst, nothing ever happened. Nobody came looking for her or Achilles. Nobody came to hunt him down or claim ownership over him, and And even though Andy had expected it, Achilles never asked her the question she feared the most. Why was she young while he was growing old? Achilles didn't care. He had spent a lifetime with Andy, and she had given him more than enough he could have ever wished for. Then the day came when Achilles sat Andy down and told her to leave him. He told her to walk away before people began asking questions. They fought all night, but in the end, Andy had always known that Achilles was right, and because he was right, Andy did as she was told. She walked away. This is when Andy returns to the bunker where she, Booker, and Nile are currently hiding. As she enters and watches Nile struggling with her thoughts again, Andy tells us that she sympathizes with Nile. She understands what Nile is going through, but understanding and sympathy only take you so far. Nile is going to have to learn that fast. We then see Nile get distracted by all of the artifacts Andy has stashed away in this bunker, and a particular sculpture by Auguste Rodin catches her eye. This is when Andy tells her that she remembers Auguste, and this blows Nile's mind. Booker then chimes in and jokes that Andy might have known Auguste a little too well, but Nile is too distracted by all of the artifacts to pay any attention to him. Surprised by Nile's knowledge about all of this stuff, they question her and soon learn that Nile had planned on attending art history school once she was done serving in the military. She and her mother used to love Antiques Roadshow, which sparked her interest in art history at an early age. This is when Nile spots a hidden painting in a corner, and when she moves the cloth covering it, she discovers that it's a Pickersgill. The woman in the photo then catches Nile's eye, and she soon realizes that it's Andy. And though Nile doesn't know it yet, this is a portrait of Andy and Achilles. Before Nile can ask Andy any personal questions, Andy covers the painting and walks away. Andy then asks Nile and Booker to focus on the present instead of the past. They need to find Nikki and Joe, and this is when Nile asks, why can't they simply dream where Nile and Joe are? And this is when Andy reveals to her that the dreams only come once an unmet immortal is born on Earth. The dreams allow you to find them, but once you have found them, the dreams stop. This means that they're all meant to find each other, but once that is done, the rest is up to them. This is when Booker reveals that he has maybe found a lead. Copley has gone private, and he has just found that he owns a consulting firm in the UAE called the Veritas Assessment. Nile questions them about Copley, and they tell her how they did a job for him around 8 years ago when he was still a CIA agent. He's now got an office in Dubai, and though it's their only lead for now, it's better than nothing. Nile, however, seems to have noticed something that has put her on edge. Andy orders them to get ready to go to Dubai, and this is when we see Nikki and Joe being brought into Merrick's office. Merrick starts by acknowledging that Nick Smith and Joe Jones aren't likely their real names, but when they refuse to say anything, Merrick starts by taking the first step and introducing himself like a true megalomaniac. He says, I'm Stephen Merrick. All you really need to know about me is that I'm really wealthy, and I got that way by being smart, and more importantly, by being ruthless. He then threatens them, tells them about his huge pharmaceuticals business, which eventually leads him to revealing the obvious. Nikki and Joe have something that he wants, something that he's going to get one way or the other, their immortality. He then menacingly reveals all the information that Copley has managed to put together, historical documents, old photographs, books, and more that prove Nikki and Joe's age to be at least a few hundred years old, while he suspects that Andy is at least 2,000 years old. He then introduces them to Dr. Ivan, an indifferent doctor who doesn't care about ethics. Ivan will be the one testing them, and this is when Merrick pulls out his pocket knife and tries to stab Joe. Joe, however, uses his chains to restrain Merrick and then puts his own knife directly against his face. Nikki disarms one of the guards and takes his gun, and then holds Kylie and the other guards at gunpoint. Their mistake? Turning their backs to Copley and Ivan. This is when Ivan pulls out a pistol and shoots Joe through the head. Nikki gets shot by Kylie next, and this is when Merrick unleashes his psychopath. Now that he is in control again, he drags Joe by the hair, shoves him onto the table, and then begins stabbing him again and again as if he's a pincushion. Nikki asks him to stop, and this is when Merrick grabs him as well and starts stabbing him, because the two of them are immortal, because they can't be killed. The two of them are like toys. He can unleash his anger, stab them as much as he wants, and then wait for them to heal so that he can start all over again. This display of horrid depravity, however, shows everyone in the room who Merrick actually is. Kylie, his guards, Copley, and even Ivan are horrified by this side of Merrick as the latter smiles maniacally with his entire face and body covered in Nikki and Joe's blood. He then orders his men to take away Nikki and Joe so that Ivan can begin testing, and once they are gone, he turns to Copley and says, "Don't look at me like that, like you never wanted to try that yourself." And Copley replies, "I can say with some certainty that I haven't." No, Merrick simply laughs and reminds Copley that there's somewhere he needs to be. And this is when we catch up with Andy, Booker and Nile once again. They are now outside Copley's office building. His office is on the 34th floor, and though Booker and Nile discuss logistics like how they are going to take weapons inside the building, Andy simply walks out and orders them to follow her lead. We see Nile questioning Booker a lot. Questions like how he found this place, how he found Copley's website, and whether the website specifically stated this location. She then sarcastically remarks that it's a good thing that Booker is the only one who knows how to work a laptop. And this is when Andy straight up walks to the guard at the reception and knocks him out by slamming his face into the table. She then knocks out the second one by kicking him in the face. The three of them then arm themselves with the weapons behind the counter, and this is when Nile helps them out another mile by disabling the security of the building. Turns out Nile has also worked as a security guard in the past, and when they question her about all the jobs Nile has had in the past, she reveals that she has worked as a security guard, web designer, social media consultant, reporter, waitress, and more. Andy remarks that Nile has been busy, considering that she has only been alive for 27 years. And this is when Nile remarks, "Every day you waste is one you don't get back, right?" This is when she manages to put the building in test mode, which disables the security, and while Booker goes over her handiwork, she quickly pulls Andy aside and informs her that she doesn't trust Booker. She tells Andy that technology isn't magic. You can't access the internet in an ancient bunker. But before she can finish her sentence, Booker shows up and forces the two of them into the elevator. As the doors close, we see that Andy has gotten the hint, but when they reach the 34th floor, she is too hungry for revenge to worry about Booker for now. She runs towards Copley's office door and then kicks it in. Surprisingly, Copley is already in there, waiting for them. He tries to manipulate Andy, tries to get her to talk by stating that this is strictly professional, but Andy isn't having any of it. She forces Copley to his knees and presses her gun against his forehead, and this is when Booker shoots her in the leg when Copley asks him to do so. Nile charges Booker while screaming that she had suspected this, but Booker ends up shooting her as well. He then shoots the gun out of Andy's hand and then shoots her again while confessing to her that he's simply trying to end it all. That's all that he is trying to do. The Old Guard, Volume 1, Opening Fire, Issue Number 5, Will Time Really Fly? The issue starts with a bullet wound in Andy's neck as she confesses to us that she should have listened to Nile. She should have trusted her gut, because just like Nile, she saw this coming as well. She had seen signs of this happening back in Paris, but Andy just didn't want to know. She simply didn't want her delusions of a perfect family to break. I mean, how else could Copley's men find the safe house? Andy had known the answer to this question, a question that she had refused to ask, and now she and Nile were paying the price for it. Nile runs to her aid, while Booker still holds the two of them at gunpoint. However, by now, Andy has begun to heal, and though she's hungry for revenge, she knows she has to play her cards right to get out of this. So she starts by confronting Copley for betraying them, for revealing their secret. And this is when Copley coldly tells Andy that he is going to deliver the two of them to his employer. Andy then starts by brutally describing what Merrick is going to do to them, what he is likely doing to Nikki and Joe right now. This is when Copley lashes out and screams that this is what it has all been about from the start. He wants to know their secret, and he wants to know how old Andy is. And this is when Andy decides to give Copley what he wants. She tells him that she is 6,732 years old, give or take, because it gets hard to keep track after a while. This not only surprises Copley, but also Nile, who is standing beside her. But Andy's real motive for revealing this information was to keep everyone, including Booker, distracted as she slowly inched closer to him. Now that she is within reach, she tackles Booker, snatches away his gun, while Nile leaps for the one on the floor. Andy uses Booker as a human shield, and she and Nile take out the remaining guards in the room with relative ease. Copley tries to run away, but Andy stops him before he can make a move. She orders Nile to get the soldiers' gear because they are going to need it, and she then begins to berate Copley for betraying them. Copley, by now, has given up. He reveals that 30 more men are on their way here, and if Andy pursues use him, he can help cover their tracks. But for now, there's no way out of this building, not without getting caught anyway. However, this is when Andy takes aim and pulls the trigger. Copley flinches, expecting the worst, but soon realizes that Andy has spared him and has instead shot the glass beside him. She then warns Copley that this was her last ounce of mercy and that he had better not make her regret making this decision. She then breaks the glass window with her fist and tells Nile that they're going to jump in order to escape. Nile calls Andy crazy because they are on the 34th floor, but Andy reassures her that she has done this before, and when the office doors behind them are swung wide open by the 30 guards Copley told them about, Andy and Nile have no choice but to leap out of the window while dragging Booker along with them. They plummet for a good few seconds, and this is when Andy looks at Nile and asks, "So, ready any good books lately?" And Nile angrily screams, "I fucking hate you, Andy!" Nile falls on a car while Andy and Booker hit the asphalt. Andy advises Nile to stay still until they regenerate. Nile has her eye hanging out of its socket, and she can't help but ask Andy if it is always this bad. And this is when Andy reveals that she lied to her. After all, skyscrapers have already been around for the past century or so, and this was the first time she has done something like this. Booker tries to crawl away, but an injured Andy manages to grab onto his ankle because he has a lot of questions to answer. Back at Merrick's office, he is informed by Ivan that he hasn't managed to find anything unique in either Nikki or Joe that would warrant their seeming immortality. Naturally, this doesn't please Merrick at all, and though Ivan is rechecking the results, for now, it seems that the two of them are perfectly normal, exceptionally healthy men. Merrick lashes out because there is nothing normal about the two of them. After all, they're immortal, and this is when Ivan says, "Have you considered the possibility that their ability is beyond science to describe, and therefore beyond our ability to replicate?" Rage takes over Merrick, and he is only able to control it with his fist, inches away from Ivan's face. He then barges into the lab where Joe and Nikki are being held and threatens to stab them over and over again until he gets what he wants. Hell, he threatens to grind them to a slurry and pour them through a sieve to get their immortality. This is when Nikki tells Merrick that they aren't immortal. Their time simply hasn't come yet. Everyone on Earth dies, even them. This leaves Merrick speechless, and before he can say more, Kylie walks in and informs him of what has happened in Copley's office. Andy and Nile, meanwhile, have driven Booker into the middle of the desert, and Andy is livid. She is seething with anger. She pushes Booker out of the car and holds him at gunpoint. When Nile tries to intervene, she orders her to stay out of it, and Booker uses this opportunity to snatch away Andy's gun. In retaliation, Andy grabs Nile's pistol and holds Booker at gunpoint. With the two of them holding each other at gunpoint, Booker begs for Andy to let him explain himself, but she instead pulls the trigger, and so does Booker. They keep shooting each other while justifying their actions. Booker says that he did this for both of them, but Andy simply can't get over his betrayal after having spent centuries alongside each other. Nile, meanwhile, is screaming for them to stop, but they continue shooting at each other, and thus, when she has had enough, she grabs her rifle and shoots both of them. This incapacitates them momentarily, and this is when Nile screams, "Stop it! The two of you, old as dirt, acting like little babies." This is when both Booker and Andy calm down, and Andy decides to ask Booker why he betrayed them. This is when Booker reveals that he wants the same thing as Andy, and that he too has been living his life riddled with guilt. He had 4 sons. The last one died of cancer, while still condemning and berating his father for not sharing his immortality with him. He has watched Andy drink away each night for the past century until she passes out. He knows she too wants this to end, which is why he sided with Merrick. If the man can find out why they keep living, then maybe he can put a stop to this. Booker then looks into the distance and tells the two of them that he just wants it to stop. All the years of regret, the memories, the loss, and loneliness. He just wants it to stop. Both of them have almost healed by now, and this when Andy finds meaning in what Nile said earlier that day. Every day you waste is one you don't get back. And this is when she tells Booker that she doesn't want it to end at all. Andy is looking for a reason to live, and right now, that reason is the people on her team. Andy then calmly asks him if he is willing to help them, if he is willing to take them to Merrick and help them rescue Joe and Nikki. With his head lowered, Booker nods, and this is when Andy tells him that he is going to have to own up to what he has done once they have rescued their team. Booker once again nods, and tells Andy that he understands, and so, an hour or so later, we catch up with Merrick as he keeps a close eye on all the feeds from his security cameras. Kylie and Merrick's conversation reveals that they have armed their men with non-lethal weapons like flashbangs, mace, and baseball bats, because the goal is to knock out the Immortals so that they can be held captive. If they shoot them, they will simply get up and kill them all. Upon realizing that Copley is nowhere to be found, Merrick heads back to his suite, while he and the rest of them are completely oblivious to the three figures entering their building wearing burqas. Merrick calls Copley and orders him to come to his apartment, but Copley outright denies his order. In fact, Copley quits on the spot while telling Merrick that he is going to die at the hands of Andy anytime now. Merrick curses Copley and threatens to have him killed, but this is when we see Copley in the first class of a flight heading out of Dubai. Before Merrick can say more, a huge explosion rocks the building, and this is when Copley cuts the call after telling Merrick that his end is near. The entire building is in shambles, distracted by the explosion. The civilians are running in different directions, which is why none of them fail to notice Booker, Andy, and Nile under the burqas armed with rifles as they board the elevator to the penthouse. Dozens of soldiers guard the entrance to the penthouse, but when Andy shows up unarmed, they try to apprehend her, only to be ambushed by Nile and Booker, who are hiding behind her robes. They kill soldier after soldier with relative ease, and when one of them throws a flashbang, Andy uses another soldier's body to subdue the explosion. They then continue shooting their way through the penthouse, and though there's a moment of tension when Andy shoots a man awfully close to Booker's head, they quickly get over it and continue sweeping the premises. The shots have been heard by Nikki, Joe, and Ivan, and Kylie orders the doctor to keep the door to the lab locked until all of this is over. However, this was a grave mistake, because once Ivan is locked in with Nikki and Joe, they start manipulating him. They tell him how ruthless Andy is and how she is going to torture and punish him for what he has done to them. Ivan is clearly scared, and this is when they offer him a way out. If he lets them go, they will put in a good word for him, which should help him save his skin. Ivan quickly frees the two of them, but this is when Joe and Nikki reveal that this was all a ruse. Ivan thinks he helped them, but they know the reality. He only helped them so that he could help himself. He has no conscience, because if he did, he wouldn't have been so eager to torture and do various tests on them. And the worst of all, he was the one who shot Joe through the head. And so, Joe grabs Ivan and twists his neck, which kills him instantly. This is when Andy unlocks the lab and jokes that they shouldn't have come if Nikki and Joe were planning to escape on their own. Nile and the two of them quickly introduce themselves to each other, and this is when Booker, who is standing guard, informs them that there's a big problem at hand. Joe and Nikki learned about his betrayal during captivity, but when they try to tell Andy about it, she reveals that she already knows and that they will handle it once this is all over. They then exit the lab, gun blazing, while shooting everyone in sight. However, when they peek out of the next door, they realise that an ambush has been set up for them. The soldiers take aim and fire warning shots, but sadly, nobody opens the door. Andy and Nikki are the only ones on the other side of it, and as they smoke, we learn that it's Booker, Nikki, and Joe's turn to get them out of this pickle. Their solution: dangle Joe from a floor above and swing him behind the waiting soldiers for an ambush of their own. Joe leaps out of the window and begins firing as soon as the soldiers are within range. He takes out most of them, and once he gets his hands on Kylie, he throws the big guy out of the window for shooting Nikki while they were in handcuffs. Now that everyone's dead, there is only one person they need to hunt down: Merrick himself. And after realising that there's no way he would have fled without his security, they quickly come to the conclusion that he is likely hiding in the bathroom. Their guess is right, and they find Merrick cowering in his bathtub while begging for mercy. He tries to cut a deal with them, but before he can spew more venom, all of them take aim and pull the trigger at point-blank range. A few days later, we see that the crew is in Malta. Booker is sitting by the shore while the rest of them discuss and argue what they should do with him. Nile joins Booker to offer him some moral support, but Booker knows what he has done. He knows his crime, and all he is awaiting now is judgment. Before Nile leaves, he tells her that she is a good kid and that she is going to be a great addition to the team. Minutes later, once the crew has made their decision, he is joined by Andy. She isn't angry anymore. In fact, she looks a little sad, though she does a pretty good job of hiding it. She tells Booker that the price for betraying them is exile for 100 years, and 100 years from now, they will meet here on the same shore in Malta again. Till then, Booker is alone, and this is his punishment. The Old Guard, Volume 2, Force Multiplied, Issue Number 1, New Player. We now see the events of 6,700 years ago, somewhere in central Eurasia, when the entire continent was covered in ice. A huge army of warriors on horseback races towards their battle, and among them is a young Andromache. And this is her first battle that she is fighting alongside her sisters and mother. She roars and screams at the top of her lungs, and as her horse collides with the other army, she leaps into the air and jumps into action. Andromache might not remember much of her past, but she remembers this vividly. After all, this was her first battle. The young girl kills men with relative ease, and her sisters cheer her on as bloodlust takes over her. Seeing how eager her daughter is, her mother grabs her by the collar on horseback and then flings her towards the leader of the army. Confused at first, but resolute the very next second, Andromache roars as she lands on her feet and swings at the man. She catches him in the gut, but this is when a rogue spear stabs her through the shoulder. This is her first failure, and her first taste of fear as a gnarly soldier beelines for her while wielding a jagged dagger. Thankfully, her mother comes to her rescue, and when all is said and done, Andromache is tasked to take care of the prisoners. She grabs the chains handed by her mother, and soon her disappointment once again turns into rage. We then catch up with Andy and Nile in the modern day. They are in California, racing down Highway 1 in high-performance streetcars, as Andy confesses to us that despite being more than 6,000 years old, she is still making mistakes. Mistakes that she can't blame on anyone or anything else but herself. She is keeping in touch with the rest of the crew using a Bluetooth headset, and as they turn the corner, we see that they are being chased by dozens of cops, as well as a helicopter. Nile is in the other car, and as they continue the chase, Andy tells us that she didn't like this plan in the first place. We then see how all of this started. Andy, Nile, Joe, and Nikki showed up at a lavish mansion in a van when they spotted the sports cars outside. Andy knew instantly that she wanted to steal one of them, and upon reaching the mansion, Andy and Nile rushed inside as Joe and Nikki waited outside. After minutes of gunshots and explosions, Andy and Nile emerge from the mansion once again, this time escorting at least a dozen women who were being trafficked. An armed gunman from the mansion tried to stop them, but before he could pull the trigger, Andy reacted and shot him in the heart. After loading all the women in the van with Nikki and Joe, she and Nile decided to create a distraction for the police, who were on the payroll of the organisation operating this human trafficking ring. They stole the sports cars, and when a police cruiser tried to block their way, Andy and Nile emptied their rifles magazines into it before escaping. The officers were left unhurt, but the car was clearly destroyed, and this is when we catch up with Andy and Nile in the present once again as they race down Route 1. The two of them soon spot a roadblock ahead, and this is when they decide to use it to their advantage. Instead of ramming it head-on just before they are about to collide, Andy crashes her car into Nile's, which sends both vehicles tumbling into the roadblock and then off the bridge. This results in a huge explosion, which allows Andy and Nile to make their escape. They watch from afar as the police search through and scour through the wreckage all night, and once the two of them have confirmed that they are presumed dead, they leave the scene. Joe and Nikki pick them up in the middle of the night, and when Joe informs her that everything went smoothly and that the girls are safe, Andy tells them that they should continue following the human trafficking chain until they reach the top. We then head to Marseille and catch up with Booker, who is drunk out of his mind in the middle of the night. He stumbles up some stairs and then somehow enters his apartment building while being completely unaware that two men are tailing him. When he tries to open the front door, he drops his keys, and by the time he has picked them up, the door swings wide open. It was already unlocked. Thinking that it might have been his mistake, Booker stumbles inside and locks the door behind him while being completely unaware of the mysterious figure sitting in the chair in front of him beside the window. When Booker finally spots her, he pulls out his gun and fires the shot, which the figure manages to avoid with relative ease. He then begins to question the mysterious woman. He asks her name, but she tells him that her name's not important. What's important is his name, Sébastien Lelivre, and she wants to know where the others are. When Booker hears this, he starts firing again, which prompts the woman to jump into action. She disarms him, hits him in the gut, and then does a backflip while kicking him in the face. Booker falls back into the arms of the two men who are tailing him, and as they hold him in place, the woman asks him about the others again. Booker tries to play dumb, and this is when the woman kicks him in the face and knocks him out. She then orders her goons to load him up in their van, and when we catch up with them again, Booker is aboard her private yacht, which is ready to leave for international waters. She tells Booker that she was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but now he has left her with no other choice. She then puts a chain around his neck and tells Booker that he is going to tell her everything she wants to know, whether he likes it or not, because from now on, she owns him. The Old Guard, Volume 2, Force Multiplied, Issue Number 2, Old Flames. The next day, Andy and Nile's little street chase on Route 1 is being reported on national news. The news tells the public about the chase. They tell them about the 8 people found dead in the mansion and that no officers were injured in the eventual crash. However, to no one's surprise, they fail to mention the dozens of missing trafficked women. The news is being watched by everyone in the police station, including a man named Moose, who soon gets a text from an unknown number asking him to meet someone at Siopino's in 1 hour. Moose promptly leaves the station early while telling his partner, Riley, that he's grabbing an early dinner. Once he reaches the restaurant, he orders a drink and takes a seat beside Nile, who is surprisingly already here. He tries to buy her a drink, but she denies his offer and quickly leaves the scene. Once she has left, Moose walks over to her seat, opens the newspaper she was reading, and finds important documents that Nile has left for him. This is when Moose decides to chase after her, and after calling out to her 3 times, Nile finally turns around and addresses him. Their conversation reveals that Nile has been tipping him off for the past 3 incidents, and though her information hasn't steered him wrong yet, he still has questions. Tons of questions. He starts by wanting to know her name, and as Joe, Nikki and Andy watch this little meet-cute unfold from a car in the parking lot, Joe and Nikki start joking around. They know that this will end in a romantic dinner, but with each joke they make, Andy is getting angrier and angrier. She knows how this ends. She has been here before, and so have they. So why would Nikki and Joe joke about a situation like this? Her anger takes over, and before Moose and Nile enter the restaurant, she exits the car and starts walking after them. Joe and Nikki try to stop her, and this is when Andy lashes out. Why shouldn't she save Nile from this situation? After all, compared to them, she is still just a baby. And this is when Nikki calmly reminds Andy that this isn't a lesson either of them can force on Nile. She has to learn this one herself. Why is Nikki always right? Why does he always have to be so wise? Andy curses, gets back in the car and decides to drink away the night once again. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean Ocean, 44 kilometers outside Corsica, the yacht from last night is anchored in the calm sea. The woman from last night enjoys wine while watching the sunset, and once she has finished, she tells her men that it's time. They quickly grab a rope and start pulling on it, and we soon realise that on the other end of it is none other than Booker. He is clearly dead, his lungs are full of water, but after a minute or so, he coughs out all the water and then comes back to life. As soon as he sees the woman, he calls her a slut, and this is when she orders him to watch his language, and then orders her men to bring him inside. Once inside, Booker is plopped into a chair and handed a towel to dry himself. This minuscule act of kindness comes at the cost of revealing information about his crew. The woman wants to know where the others are, but when Booker refuses to speak, the woman gets up from her chair and decides to try a different approach. She tells Booker that she knows what he is hoping for. She knows he is hoping to die, but that won't happen. She doesn't know when his time will come, but one thing she knows for sure is that his time isn't coming today or anytime soon. She will keep drowning him over and over again, and he will keep dying and coming back to life over and over again. She knows it's painful. She knows how much it hurts more than Booker can possibly imagine. And this entire speech tips Booker off. At first, he had thought she was sent by Copley, but now he knows better. She is one of them. She is one of the Immortals. And the fact that he hasn't dreamed about her yet means that she is old, older than him at least. This statement, where Booker says that the woman is like them, gets him kicked in the face by her. The woman snarls and says, "I am nothing like you." Before Booker can say more, the satellite phone on the yacht rings, and the woman is informed that Andy and her team are on the move once again. She angrily grabs the phone and demands to know when and where Andy is going to strike next. Whoever this source is, they have some exceptional contacts and resources for not having tipped off Andy or the rest of the crew yet. That night, when Nile returns to the hotel room, it's clear that Andy is pissed, but when Nile tries to probe her about it, Andy changes the subject and tells Nile that they're supposed to be headed out for a job. Joe and Nikki are already out for recon. Sometime later, Andy and Nile join Joe on the docks, while Nikki keeps a close eye on the entire thing from afar using a sniper. Dozens of men armed with SMGs and shotguns are patrolling the scene, but they are going to be no match for Andy and her crew. Nile finds the entire plan to be a bit crass. How can they just walk in and kill everyone without remorse? This is when Andy reminds her that all of them are human traffickers, which essentially makes them modern-day slavers. And once everyone is positioned, Andy gives them the signal and then takes off running to carry out the assault. Nikki starts off by taking out all the men keeping watch from high ground. Once that is done, the rest of them make their move and swiftly take out 3 patrolling men. Andy ruthlessly murders one man after another, and it's clear that she has a different kind of hatred for human traffickers. Nile and Joe stealthily take out the last patrol, and Andy then takes care of the 2 men who are on a smoke break. Once Nikki has confirmed that the entire scene is clear, Andy shoots open the shipping container, which seemingly houses the trafficked women, only to then be surprised out of her body when someone says, "Hello, Andromache." The very next second, Andy is sent flying back by a shotgun slug, and out walks the mysterious woman who has been holding Booker hostage till now. The Old Guard, Volume 2, Force Multiplied, Issue Number 3, Catching Up. This issue starts with Andy introducing us to the various transportation methods over the years and how they changed the way people saw and perceived the world. When there was nothing, only your feet to carry you, the world was smaller. Eventually, it became bigger with the beasts of burden, and then much bigger with the invention of boats, but also riskier. This eventually led to ships. And this is when we catch up with Andy and the mysterious woman from previous issues while they are aboard a medieval seafaring vessel. While their crew takes care of the journey, Andy and the mysterious woman chase and swing around the ship while living the best times of their lives. But this visual is contrasted by Andy's vivid descriptions of how dangerous the sea could be. Andy tells us that despite the risk, the invention of ships opened the entire world up to them, and that is exactly what they were doing, traveling the entire world and exploring unseen places. However, that is until they were caught in a raging storm, a storm with high enough waves to overshadow most buildings of that era. The entire ship was engulfed in water. The crew was under the threat of being washed over with each passing second, and the situation was growing dire and dire. This wasn't anything new. They were used to this, especially Andy and her fellow Immortals. We then see Andy helping Joe and then climbing back up onto the deck to help the rest of the crew navigate this storm. This is when Andy spotted the mast breaking at its seams. The falling debris threatened the life of the mysterious woman we know from before, and thus, before she succumbed to her destiny, Andy intervened and pushed her out of the way and took her place instead. Andy was trapped under the sails, her back likely broken, but the mysterious woman was in a much more precarious spot. She was concerned for Andy, and by the time she noticed that she was standing too close to the edge, a huge wave was already looming over her. By the time Andy screamed to warn her, she had already been washed overboard and was nowhere to be seen when the water retreated. This is when Andy tells us her name, Noriko. Andy and she had been together for almost 2 millennia, and Andy had loved her more than anything. But just like that, Noriko was gone, washed overboard and lost to the sea, never to be seen again until today, years later, and she had just shot Andy in the chest with a shotgun at point-blank range. Noriko smiles like a maniac as she greets Andy. She apologizes for the dramatic entrance, and when Joe tries to come to terms with the fact that Noriko is still alive, he, too, gets shot in the chest. Nile jumps into action and shoots Noriko in the leg with her rifle, and this is when Noriko turns around and blows away Nile's right kneecap. Noriko then puts the shotgun to Nile's head and playfully states that she is going to start with the youngest to check if she has been initiated into the School of Pain yet. But this is when Andy jumps into action and slams her against a shipping container. She begs Noriko to stop, and this is exactly what Noriko wants. She wants to hear Andromache beg, and this is when she knocks Andy away and then climbs the nearby containers. Andy follows her while Nile questions Joe about what the hell is going on. When Andy reaches the top, Noriko is nowhere to be seen, and as she begs her former flame to just talk with her, Noriko instead attacks her with her katana. Andy pulls out her labris, and the two instantly begin sparring. Andy keeps deflecting as Noriko keeps unleashing her fury, and as Noriko continues to talk, we learn that she was abandoned and stranded at sea for centuries, constantly drowning and coming back to life over and over over again, abandoned by the one who promised to be by her side forever and ever. She is clearly pissed at Andy for abandoning her, and all Andy can do is be horrified, surprised and flabbergasted as she tries to tell Noriko that she did her best to find her. They all did, but Noriko isn't fazed. To her, Andromache abandoned her, just like she abandoned Booker, and this statement catches Andy off guard, which allows Nikki to shoot them both through the chest with his sniper. The high-caliber bullet incapacitates both of them, albeit momentarily, and this gives Nikki enough time to get down from the cranes to catch up with his team. Moments later, Nile and Joe catch up with Andy and find her stabbed to death on top of the container. Moments later, she comes back to life, grabs her labries and begins searching for Noriko again, but she is long gone. The next day, the docks are crawling with the police, and this is when Agent Moose shows up on the scene, and we learn that he's from the FBI. The detective in charge, Ramirez, informs him that his partner is already here, and he is the one who told the police that this was a confrontation between human traffickers, which led to them finding 8 bodies here. Moose is naturally flabbergasted by this information. Riley would never show up here because he wasn't the one who was tipped off by Nile. He quickly goes to meet up with the man in question, who is already investigating the crime scene and expecting Moose. We soon see that this is none other than Copley, and he is doing his best to guide Moose through the crime scene so that he can start asking the right questions. Questions whose answers will allow Copley to manipulate him for his own gains. Their conversation also reveals that Moose's real name is Mustafa King, but most people call him Moose. Copley forces Moose to climb on top of the shipping container with him, and upon re-evaluating the scene, Moose comes to the conclusion that there's too much blood here considering the number of bodies that were discovered. Copley smiles as Moose begins to follow the path laid out for him, and this is when Moose begins to speculate what might have happened. Maybe the perpetrators disposed of the bodies in the sea, or maybe some of them were gravely injured and they narrowly managed to get away. Copley, however, is 10 steps ahead of him. He quickly figures out that it was Nikki who took the shot from the crane, and when Moose continues asking him questions, Copley tells him that he knows who has been tipping him off. This is when Moose has had enough. He confronts Copley and tells him that he wants some answers, and this is when Copley tells him that he does too. It's the reason why he's here in the first place. We then see Andy standing on the coast, staring out at the sea, when Joe and the rest of them arrive in a van to catch up with her. They all now understand the depth of this situation, which is why Nikki and Nile decide to stay back while Joe goes to talk with her. He carries a duffel bag with him, and while he is gone, Nikki tells Nile more about Noriko and how they all were together for 4 centuries, but that Andy and she had been together even longer. Joe simply stands beside Andy in silence until she decides to open up. She tells Joe that Noriko has Booker and that she blames Andy for abandoning her. Andy needs to talk to Noriko and sort this mess out as soon as possible, and Joe doesn't say a word in retaliation. All he asks is how they find Noriko, and this is when Andy reveals that they don't find her. They let Noriko find them. That night at John's Grill, Nile casually tips off Moose again and begins to leave. However, this is when he grabs her by the arm and reveals that he knows her name, and it's high time that she offered him some explanation. Nile snatches away her hand and tells Moose that this is neither the time nor the place for it, and as she walks away, we see that Copley was already hiding in the crowd and keeping a close eye on her. Nile then walks out with Moose closely following her, and this is when Noriko exits a nearby vehicle to ambush them. However, before she can take another step, Andy shows up behind her and tells her that they need to talk. And so, Nile and Moose walk away while Noriko and Andy walk in the other direction, and when Copley exits the restaurant while pondering whom he should follow, Nikki and Joe quickly pull him into a nearby alley. Nikki says, "I'd give them some space, James. They've got a lot of catching up to do, and so do we." The Old Guard, Volume 2, Force Multiplied, Issue Number 4, Hopelessness and Revenge. This issue starts by showing us Andy's past. Andy still looks the same age, but her stepmother, who had adopted her, looks much older than before. They are riding through the woods, and this is when Andy spots movement in among the trees. She warns her mother, and we see dozens of men hiding in the tree line waiting to ambush them. Despite Andy's warnings, arrows come whizzing through the air, and kill at least a dozen of their soldiers, including her mother. And though Andy jumps into action, she tells us the dichotomy of this moment. Her mother had loved her at first, but when she had learned that Andy wouldn't age while she succumbed to her time, her mother had conspired to have Andy killed. This ambush was part of that plan, and before the army, she was conspiring with killed Andy. Her mother screamed in her face and expressed her dissent for her. This broke Andy's heart, broke her spirit, and though moments later she was stabbed through the torso by multiple spears, the real pain resulted from her mother's betrayal. Of course, Andy came back to life a few hours later, and when she did, she found out that the other army had betrayed her mother. She was lying dead in the mud beside her, and the men were taking women from her tribe as slaves. When Andy looked up, she found a couple of them actively assaulting one of the women, and this is when Andy grabbed the axe near her and decided to fight back. She leaped into action and decapitated the man before he could lay another hand on the woman, and this is when the others followed her lead and began to fight back. They won that fight, which resulted in Andy becoming their new leader. Andy was revered, and because they knew very little back then, Andy was eventually worshipped as a god by her tribe. At first, Andy enjoyed her time as the tribe leader, but as the years went by, she soon realized that her only true constant companion was loneliness. Even though she had everything she could imagine, every luxury, every resource, Andy was still lonely. She tried to distract herself with wars in the subsequent years, tried running away, tried living with the loneliness, even tried to make peace with it and embrace it. But as the centuries passed by and she lost all those she came to know, she realized there was no escape, not even in her dreams, because during her nights she was haunted by the same woman over and over again, Noriko. And just when Andy was about to give up, she had another dream, a different one, and this time she dreamed of a man named Lycon, a man Andy found within a year of dreaming of him. And so, for the first time since her birth, Andy was no longer alone, and for a while she slept in peace, but only for a while, because when she tried to talk to Lycon about Noriko, he outright denied her existence. And Andy was still young back then. She didn't know if he was lying or telling the truth. The only thing she knew for certain was the fact that the woman was alone just like her, and that Andy needed to find her. And so, when Lycon wouldn't trust her, when he decided to ignore her whenever she brought up Noriko, it eventually pushed Andy to leave him behind and find her on her own. And so, she found Noriko in the middle of the desert, just like she found Noriko in San Francisco today. Surprisingly, Noriko is in a great mood today, but her responses to Andy's questions soon reveal why that is. She has gone over the edge, and discussing sensitive matters with ease is no longer a skill at her disposal. She bluntly jokes that Andy should start by apologizing for leaving her to die in the middle of the ocean, and this breaks Andy's heart. And though Noriko realizes this, she still goes on to explain in excruciating detail how it feels to drown over and over again for centuries. One might think that burning to death is one of the worst ways to go, but according to Noriko, drowning is even more horrid. Andy apologizes to her, tells her that they tried to look for her, but when they couldn't find her, they thought she was dead. Andy prayed that she was dead. And this is when Noriko jumps up on a bench, looks down at Andy and says, Did you pray, Andromache? Sincerely and with all your heart?" Andy is left speechless again, and after some thinking, she corrects herself and tells Noriko that she had hoped she was dead. But in Noriko's books, this is even worse, even more dangerous than faith, and Andy should know better. She should know that it's all hopeless, considering how long she has lived. We then catch up with Copley as Nikki and Joe toy with him by telling him about grog, and how it was quite different from what seems to pass in the modern day for a drink of the same name. Copley takes a sip of the drink when they insist, and to his surprise, it doesn't taste that bad. But despite this small talk, Copley knows that they didn't bring him here to teach him about drinks of the yesteryear, and this is when Joe angrily tells him that he's damn right, and that if Andy was here, he would already be dead. Joe's anger takes over him, and he grabs Copley by the shoulder, but Nikki quickly steps in and helps Joe calm down. Copley tells them that he knows how he looks. Him getting involved in their lives at a time like this, when Noriko is back, looks bad, but he promises them that he isn't in cahoots with her. We then catch up with Andy and Noriko again, and the two of them have now begun to debate, considering hearing Noriko's last statement. Andy doesn't think that the world is hopeless. She doesn't think that humanity is hopeless after all. All the progress in science, technology, and sanitation over the years alone should justify their hopeful existence. This is when Noriko points to the cigarette in her hand. Tobacco once used to be a luxury. It was rare, it was holy, but now it is mass-produced, sold to billions, and it takes the lives of millions each year, more than either of them has killed in their lifetime. Andy doesn't have a retort for this. She simply lights Noriko's cigarette and allows her to continue. Noriko tells her that she has finally figured it out. She has finally figured out who they are and why they are here, and that she achieved this clarity during the centuries she spent at the bottom of the sea. She has finally understood why she was being punished. She has finally understood why Andy is being punished with all the losses, the heartbreak, and the betrayals. And, according to Noriko, it's because they all have denied who they truly are all their lives. They aren't angels, they're devils, according to Noriko. Their purpose on Earth is to make humanity suffer. We then catch up with Nikki, Joe, and Copley at the bar. Copley is showing them what he has found through his research over the past few years. He is an analyst, and though he can't be 100% sure, he is still convinced enough by the evidence he has found so far. He swipes on his phone and shows them another picture from 1956, and this is when Joe recognizes himself and Andy. The two of them are holding a 6-month-old baby. They had found her in the rubble during the rising of Budapest. Her parents had been murdered by the Soviets. This is when Copley tells them that she has grown up to be a wonderful mathematician. Her name is Rada Salak. She is a doctor now, and she won the Abel Prize in her field 8 years ago, which is equivalent to a Nobel Prize. Copley's entire reason for showing them all of this is that he changed his way of thinking a few years ago when Andy spared his life. She was almost 7,000 years old. His life meant nothing to her, yet for some reason Andy spared him, and so Copley decided to make something of it. When Copley found out their secret, he was asking the wrong question. He was trying to figure out what they were, while Merrick was trying to figure out how they were immortal, but no one in the world was trying to figure out why they were. This is what Copley decided to find out once Andy had spared him, and what he found was one of the most enlightening things to him. Every life they've taken, every life they've spared over the years has had consequences that have changed the world and have transformed it into a better place. Copley found award-winning revolutionaries in every industry who had direct connections to the Immortals, and this is when he reveals what he knows about Noriko. He didn't know her real name, not until today, but one thing he knew for certain was the fact that she wasn't like them. They like to help people, but Noriko likes to hurt them. She runs every bit of organised crime one can think of. Drugs, weapons, trafficking, you name it. Noriko is involved in it. She has ties to criminal organisations around the globe, and that's how she managed to find them. That's how she got to Booker. Copley then reveals that he knows where Noriko is holding Booker, and this is when Joe and Nikki decide to rescue him on their own. We then see Moose and Nile conversing with each other while staring out at the city skyline. Nile has told him everything, and so has Copley. But for some reason, Moose can't get himself to accept what they are saying. He doesn't even believe Nile is her real name, and so he pulls out his gun and decides to arrest Nile because she was involved in the recent incident at the docks, and this baffles Nile. How could he not believe her after all that she has done, after all that he has seen? But to Moose, this could all be fake after all. They live in a world of deep fakes, and Copley could have easily manipulated the evidence he presented to him. And so, to prove her point for the final time, Nile snatches his gun away, but instead of shooting him, she shoots herself in the head. Moose, naturally, is horrified by this entire thing. He panics, stammers, and eventually gathers himself to call this incident. However, this is when Nile comes back to life and stops him before he makes the call. He then sits down beside her, and after a bit of pondering, he tells her his real name and decides to start things all over again now that he believes her. Noriko, meanwhile, is continuing her magnanimous speech, trying to convince Andy that they are born to punish humanity on Earth. The world might think that this new age of technology and science is a step in the right direction, but both Noriko and Andy have lived for a couple of millennia, and they both know that this is just the ushering of another dark age. Those same tools are being used to spread ignorance and fear. She then says to Andy, "Face it, my love, we aren't them. We were never them. They are vermin, which makes us the exterminators." But Andy has heard enough to change her mind about Noriko, enough to know that she no longer loves this woman. She simply denies what Noriko is saying, and for the last time, apologizes for abandoning her. She then says, "I wish I could be happy that you're standing here right now, Noriko, but the woman I loved died underwater." Andy then walks away from her, and this is when Noriko's anger takes over her. She can't allow Andy to walk away, not after what she did to her, and so when Andy turns around to tell Noriko that she has nothing more to say, Noriko unsheathes her katana and slices Andy's neck. The next morning, Nile wakes up in bed with Moose, and before he can wake up, she decides to exit his apartment quietly. As she is walking out, Joe texts her and informs her that they are going to rescue Booker. They tried contacting Andy, but she didn't answer her phone. But before Nile can reply, she discovers that Noriko is already out on the curb waiting for her, and she lies to Nile and tells her that Andy sent Noriko to get her. We then see where Andy really is, trapped in a car at the bottom of the ocean, a few miles out from the island of Alcatraz. The Old Guard, Volume 2, Force Multiplied, Issue Number 5, Sins of the Past. We see Andy trapped in the car, dying and coming back to life again and again every 60 seconds. Every time she comes back, she dies sooner, and it takes a lot of resurrections for her to figure out that she is trapped in the trunk of a car at the bottom of the ocean. She then tries to break out of the trunk at first. Every time she comes back, she hits, flails and kicks, but nothing works until eventually Andy realizes that Noriko hasn't been around for the past century or so, which means she doesn't know that since 2002, all cars are required to have a glow in the dark release lever to open it from the inside. Andy eventually locates the lever, and a few more resurrections later, she is able to pull on it and free herself using her mouth. Moments later, we see Andy lying on one of the rocks on the shore, missing her hands, and when she comes back to life, she vomits up a lot of water. She then waits for her hands to regenerate, and once that is done, she walks away. Nile, meanwhile, refuses to believe Noriko or fall for her manipulation, even though the latter apologizes for starting off with her on the wrong foot. Noriko then tries to pry Nile away from her crew by telling her that whatever Andy and the others may have told her about Noriko, it is nothing compared to what they have not told her about themselves. This throws Nile off. She does want to know what Andy and the rest are hiding, and Noriko uses this opportunity to try to whisk Nile away. After all, even if Nile decides to shoot her, this is a rather public place, and she is right outside Moose's apartment. She wouldn't like to create a scene here now, would she? But despite Noriko's convincing argument, Nile stands her ground and refuses to get in the car with her. And this is when Noriko gives up and tells her to ask Andromache about Law 282 the next time she sees her. Noriko then leaves, and this is when we catch up with Copley, Nikki and Joe as they arrive at the docks. Copley shows them Noriko's yacht, which is anchored out in the sea, and as they talk about Noriko, Joe and Nikki tell Copley how Noriko likely spent the past 5 centuries drowning over and over again out in the middle of the sea. This horrifies Copley, but he quickly gathers himself and then tells them about the yacht. It's a Reaver 88 Domino Super, and though it requires only a crew of 2 men, it can easily house 30 of them, and they can be sure that Noriko has that many hiding inside it. We then see Nile entering the room she and Andy are renting, only to find the floor littered with wet clothes, a waterlogged pistol, and a broken phone. This is when Andy walks out of the shower and greets Nile. She doesn't tell Nile about what Noriko did to her, and instead questions her about Moose, and Nile confesses that she did end up sleeping with him. Andy understands that Moose is hot, and she is glad that she got it out of her system. Nile is flabbergasted by this statement, but this is when Andy coldly reminds her who they are, and how, for them, men like Moose have an expiration date. She then asks about Nikki and Joe, and upon learning that they have left to rescue Booker on their own, Andy decides to quickly leave and catch up with them. Joe, Nikki and Copley have just hired a boat and are boarding it when Nile and Andy catch up to them. Upon meeting up with Andy for the first time since Dubai, Copley meekly apologizes to her and thanks her for the chance to make things right, and this is when Andy's soft side shows up, and she tells Copley that they all deserve a second chance at life. Minutes later, the boat approaches Noriko's anchored yacht, and Copley distracts the guards on duty by admiring their yacht and making small talk about it. The guards warn him that this is a private vessel and that he should leave, but Copley continues to distract them, which allows Joe, Nile and Andy to board their vessel in wetsuits while being armed with their respective swords. Nile is the only one carrying a pistol, which is why she is the one the guards on duty shoot first. They sound the alarm, and this is when Copley races the boat away and makes a sharp turn, which allows Nikki to swim swing himself onto Noriko's yacht. He gets on board and calmly walks up to the guard, shooting at him, and before taking the man's life, Nikki apologizes to him. Joe and Andy, meanwhile, make quick work of the other two guards using their labrys and swords, but once that is done, at least a dozen men emerge from below and order Andy to drop her weapon. Joe and Nile are standing on either side, which means that they haven't been spotted yet, but then again, Andy doesn't really need any help. The men order her to drop her labrys again, but Andy simply looks at them menacingly and outright denies her request. This prompts them to instantly pull their triggers, and within seconds, Andy is riddled with bullets. They blow off huge chunks of her flesh, but Andy simply stands there and takes the brunt of the assault head on, and once she starts regenerating, she leaps into action. This attack, however, is different. Andy is like an animal, and she ruthlessly decapitates and kills one man after another until everyone is dead. Even though the fight is over, Andy is still snarling in anger, and for the first time since they met, Nile is scared of her. She confronts Andy. This isn't like her. Andy has never been this ruthless, but the latter simply retorts that Nile hasn't known her for long enough. Before they can regroup and continue their assault, Noriko shows up and hands Booker over to them willingly. Andy quickly rushes to his aid, and they both have a hearty reunion, and for the first time, we see love and kindness in Andy's eyes. This emotion is spotted by Noriko as well, who is clearly jealous and outright expresses that she wishes Andy had welcomed her back in the same way. This prompts all of them to stand guard, but Noriko is quite casual about this confrontation. After all, they have her cornered, and 5 against 1 isn't exactly a fair fight. She then swings her katana at Andy. Andy blocks the attack, and this is when Noriko moves in and kisses her former lover passionately. She always knew she would lose this fight, and this kiss has only confirmed Noriko's suspicions. So what is it going to be? What is Andy going to do with her? Lock her up for eternity? Dismember her and scatter her pieces? Maybe incinerate her and scatter her ashes? But Andy simply says no. They aren't going to do anything to her. They were here for Booker, and they've gotten what they wanted. The rest of them then leave Noriko alone on her yacht and leave without uttering another word. That night, all of them are celebrating their union with pizza and beer, and even Copley has been accepted by all of them, considering how he helped them rescue Booker and how he is trying to do good with his life now. He has their approval. However, the vibe of the room changes when Nile confronts Andy about what happened on the ship. Andy denies that anything different happened today, but Nile knows everyone saw it. Andy was exceptionally brutal today, and she has been seething with anger in the background, even before Noriko showed up. Nile wants to know why that is, and when Andy decides to avoid the conversation by going for a ride, Nile brings up Law 282. This stops Andy dead in her tracks, and Nile goes on to reveal that Noriko told her about it and how she showed up outside Moose's house that morning. Andy reluctantly reveals that the law is from the Code of Hammurabi and that they were a huge thing when Babylon was still standing. Nile continues to probe Andy about it, and the latter finally reveals what Law 282 was under her breath. If a slave has said to his master, "You are not my master," he shall be brought to account as his slave, and his master shall cut off his ear. This horrifies Nile because she knows what this implies, and when Andy refuses to confess at first, Nile grows angrier and angrier, and Andy finally says, "It's the way the world was back then, Nile," but Nile retorts, "Bullshit. It's a fucking crime against humanity. You knew it was wrong. It has never not been wrong." And this is when Andy's anger finally comes to the surface, and she lets it all out with a huge scream. Of course, Andy knew. After all, how could someone think she's the good guy? She's a killer, and everyone knows it, and over the past 7,000 years, that has only amplified. She has become the ghost of war. She was born into that world, baptized in it. After all, what was Andy supposed to do with the prisoners after a war? Warn them, spank them maybe, and let them leave? What was she supposed to say to them? Sorry you didn't get to murder and rape us, but make sure never to try it again. No, Andy did what was the norm back then. They traded prisoners like animals for things they didn't have, things they couldn't make. And though Andy is being ruthless with her descriptions in the modern day, we see that a teenage Andy was indeed affected by the plight of the captured prisoners. She just didn't have the know-how or the vocabulary to stand up against it. But Andy's rant continues in the modern day, and it's clear that Noriko's words have had a huge influence on her, because she tells them all that the reason they call it human trafficking in today's age is to shy away from what it truly is. It's still slavery, but the world likes to give give their crimes a new name and pretend like it's a new problem. The world, according to Andy, is apathetic at best and evil at worst. According to her, people are vermin, and so is she, which is why Andy is done fighting. She doesn't want to fight anymore, and she is giving up. Nile finally understands her and tries to make Andy see that in a situation like this, if you aren't part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. They've been given a gift, and they have to use it to do good, no matter what their past might hold, because if they don't choose this option, then the other option is Noriko. But Andy tells Nile that she has no fight left in her. She just can't do it anymore. Andy then curls up into a ball in the corner, and this is when Nile takes a hard stance against her, because now, in her book, Andy is part of the problem, which is why she regroups the entire crew and orders them to pack up their things, because they are leaving. They all jump into action without saying another word, and as they are leaving, Andy only says one thing: "I don't want to be alone." And this is when Nile requests her to come with them to continue the fight. But with tears in her eyes, Andy tells them that she can't do that, and so, reluctantly, with remorse in their eyes, they leave Andy behind, alone in her room, alone in her life once again. Andy weeps with her face in her hands while repeating over and over again that she doesn't want to be alone. She spends the entire night like this until morning, when the door to her room finally opens and in walks Noriko with her guards in tow. She knew they'd leave her, and this is when Noriko offers Andy her hand and promises never to leave Andromache again. Andy takes her hand, and as Noriko leads her away, Andy asks, "Where are we going?" And Noriko replies, "To meet the others." The Old Guard, Volume 3, Tales Through Time, Issue Number 1, The Tale of the Labrys and a Home. The issue starts in the Canary Islands. Andy and Nile are sparring with each other, and this takes place between the events of the first two volumes. Andy is teaching Nile how to use her labrys, and the latter is clearly getting better at it. Once the two of them are done sparring, Nile asks Andy about her axe, and Andy goes on to recount how it was passed on to her by someone she assumes was her mother. Andy doesn't really remember, not after 6,000 years. Nile can't believe that this is the same axe from all those years ago, but Andy assures her that it is the same one. It was forged for her mother, and she remembers that day clearly. Andy was in awe of the axe. To her, it shone as if it could burn the air itself. It is the same axe her mother used to protect their tribe in numerous wars, the same one she bestowed upon Andy to mark her as her heir, the same axe Andy used to avenge her death, the one she eventually went on to use to protect her tribe, the one she used to become a god. Of course, over the years, it got damaged, so Andy had a new head crafted during the Bronze Age. It was sharp as hell, but also very malleable. She had to sharpen it over and over and replace the shaft numerous times until the Iron Age rolled around. Then she had a new head made, and eventually encountered a woman who showed her a better way to strap it up with leather so that it wouldn't rot away so easily. There were times when it would shatter mid-battle and Andy would have to improvise, and as the time went on and the age of guns rolled around, it became harder and harder for Andy to find blacksmiths who would craft her an axe that she preferred. But Andy kept looking, and she would always eventually get what she was looking for. This latest design was forged for her in the modern day, yet Andy still believes that this is the same axe her mother gave her. Even though every part on it may have been replaced, to her, this is still her mother's axe. We then catch up with Joe and Nikki in Berlin, 1932. They're out on a date at a gentleman's club, and though Nikki wants to have a great night out, Joe is distracted by the German soldier, whom he is sure is the worst scum on earth. Nikki's conversation reveals that Joe has a knack for finding people like him. However, it has always stopped the two of them from having a peaceful night. Joe tries to deny Nikki's accusations, and so Nikki begins to recount all the times Joe has forsaken their date nights to play the hero and save someone. Nikki doesn't mind it, honestly, but Joe can't outright deny these accusations. He reminds Joe about the atelier in Genoa, where Joe jumped in to save a young man from a fire, or the card game in Montreal, where they saved a soldier from a fighting squad. He then reminds Joe of London, where he saved the owner of a coffee house, and Joe is finally coming around, and what started off as a complaint has now turned into a game of nostalgia, where the two of them are reminiscing about the past. They talk about Zanzibar, the club in Cannes, where they saved a street hustler from a drunken sailor, and this is when Joe has had enough. He loudly proclaims that every one of these heathens deserved what they got, and they fail to notice that the soldier Joe had been eyeing earlier is passing by them with an escort on his arm. As he walks by, he curses and hurls homophobic slurs at them, and, surprisingly, instead of Joe, Nikki is the one who jumps to his feet to confront the soldier. However, this is when the madam of the establishment intervenes, helps pacify the situation, and calms Nikki and Joe down while offering them champagne on the house. She then asks the soldier to take good care of her girl and then sits down to chat with Nikki and Joe, and upon learning that they haven't called any place home in a long time, she tells them that they can always call her establishment home. Even though their relationship may be outlawed, they are always welcome here. This gives Joe an idea. He tells Nikki that he wants to commit a crime, but instead of what Nikki had assumed, Joe takes him outside and decides to dance with him under the stars, knowing too well that they could be prosecuted. This is when Nikki confesses that even though they've had more time than most lovers on Earth, every moment they spend together feels precious, as though they are stealing it from life itself. This is when their romantic dance is interrupted by the screams of a woman, and wouldn't you know it, it's the same soldier from the establishment assaulting the escort. Joe leaps into action and attacks the man, while Nikki takes care of the woman. However, this is when the soldier pulls out his gun and shoots Joe. Once Joe is on the ground, he laughs like a maniac and shoots at Nikki, who uses his body to save the girl. He then attacks the girl once again, only to be confronted by Joe, who has recovered from his wounds. Nikki is up again, but instead of attacking them, the soldier holds the girl hostage, and this is when a third party joins the confrontation and kills the soldier. It's the madam from the establishment, and she tells Joe and Nikki that they've met before. They might not remember her, but she remembers them very well. They saved her in Zanzibar 50 years ago, and now she has repaid her debt. As she leads the girl away, she once again reminds them that they are not alone in the world. They always have each other, which means no matter where they go, they have a home, a family. The Old Guard, Volume 3, Tales Through Time, Issue Number 2, Bonsai Shokunin and Strong Medicine. This is a tale of Noriko's past, a lesson she learned about hesitation, a lesson someone else learned as well, a lesson Noriko would never repeat in her life again. We start the story with an old samurai as he tends to his bonsai tree, wondering what would have become of the small branches that he is snipping away. Would they have blossomed beautifully, or would they have become an ugly twig? And as he does so, he is reminded of his younger days on the battlefield, when he became a weapon for his first lord, and he fought for his shogun without asking questions in exchange for a promised land. The man was naive back then, and a novice fighter, and soon, in his first battle, he was bested by Noriko. But he was young back then, and as tears streamed down his face, Noriko hesitated to kill him, and the young man watched in horror as she was shot through the head by a stray arrow. This allowed him to live, and he assumed that she did not. He eventually got good and killed numerous men and women on the battlefield. Just like the branches he snips away from his tree in the present, he snipped away lives in the past. Tens of lives, hundreds. But each life he took, he was haunted by the image of Noriko lying on the ground, bleeding, and then eventually staring directly at him, then smiling, and finally getting back to her feet. These images have haunted him all his life, and when his lord was old and the mantle was handed to him, he asked his lord if they were right to do as they were told, and his lord replied, "If it is not, then may the gods strike us down." His lord lived a long life, just like him, but now, on this day, his god is here to strike him down, and as Noriko approaches the man, he says, "This tree is no longer for me to tend. If it ever was, I wonder, who are you to make this choice?" And this is when Noriko tells the old samurai her name, and then ends up taking his life. It is September 1870, and Booker has just arrived in Gothic, Colorado. He was supposed to meet Andy here, but he arrived early, and upon arriving, he noticed that the town doctor had been hanged because supposedly he wasn't a very good one. The man who has brought him here warns him about the town's barbarism before dropping him off, and we see Booker head straight to the saloon to have a drink. Upon reaching there, he notices a couple of rowdy men surrounding a dead body. One of them is a man named Eamon, who is clearly drunk out of his mind, and their words tell us that they are waiting for one of their men to bring bring in another doctor from out of town. Sadly, 4 days have passed, and when Booker asks the barkeep about the men, he learns that these are the Coyle brothers, and the one lying dead on the table is Keenan, their youngest. He was hurt in the mine a week ago, and his older brother Eamon is delirious enough to believe that the doctor from the next town can help fix his little brother. When Eamon hears the barkeep and Booker talking about him, he walks over and starts antagonizing Booker, assuming that he is English. When Booker has had enough, he points a gun at Eamon's head before the latter can do the same and educates him. Booker isn't British, he is French, and currently he is doing everything in his power not to take Eamon's life. This is when Eamon's brother walks in with the doctor. However, upon closer inspection, the doctor informs Eamon that Keenan is already dead. This infuriates Eamon, and he decides that Keenan isn't the only one who is going to die today. The doctor is going to join him, and so the Coyle brothers start dragging him out. Booker tries to stop them by standing in their way, but he quickly gets shot in the head. The barkeep bends down by his side and prays for him, only for him to then be horrified to his core when Booker comes back to life seconds later. He then confronts Eamon and his brother just as they are about to hang the doctor and warns them against it one last time. When they don't listen to him, Booker unleashes himself upon them, and within minutes he has wiped out all of the Coyle brothers. The doctor, who has been praying all this while, can't believe his luck or his eyes. He thanks Booker for saving him, and in return, Booker asks the doctor to keep his nature and existence a secret. The doctor obviously complies, because it's not like anyone would believe him even if he told them the truth. And as the doctor rides away in his wagon, we see that his name is Milford Merrick, and that he is Stephen Merrick's ancestor. The Old Guard, Volume 3, Tales Through Time, Issue Number 3, Passchendaele and Lacus Solitudinis. This story is about Andy and how she came to have a mortal adoptive family. A man named Zeus is exquisitely preparing handmade pasta in his restaurant when he is informed by his staff that a woman covered in blood has locked herself in the bathroom. Unfortunately, Zeus doesn't have the keys to the ladies' restroom on him, and by the time they get hold of the manager who possesses the key, the woman inside walks out after cleaning herself. The staff begins asking her questions, but the woman and Zeus are dumbfounded when they look at each other. This is Andy, and she knows Zeus, and she quickly pulls him into an embrace when she realizes that she is in his restaurant. Through their conversation, Andy learns that she is in Cleveland, and when Zeus probes her, Andy reassures him that no one is following her. In fact, she didn't even know where she was until Zeus told her. Andy simply boarded a cargo plane to escape her predicament, and upon realizing that she is hungry, Zeus decides to cook her a meal. Andy is flabbergasted by Zeus's cooking, and she keeps complimenting him over and over again. As they continue to talk, Andy is finally reminded of how she met Zeus in the Battle of Passchendaele. She was hiding in the rubble, hunting down a man with a briefcase. When Andy got a chance, she took her shot and killed the man. She soon pocketed the briefcase in question, while soldiers paid no attention to her. However, this is when she spotted a little Zeus sitting beside the dead man's body. This was his paper, which meant Zeus had been orphaned, and when Andy stared into his puppy eyes, she couldn't bring herself to abandon him. In the present day, Andy apologizes to him once again, but Zeus tells her that he has made peace with his past. He understands her purpose and all she does for the world, though he hates that she meets with him every 60-odd years or so. Andy mournfully asks Zeus if he has a family, and this is when Zeus decides to take back what he said. Andy is his family, and this is why meeting her like this hurts. She bumped into him instead of coming to see him on her own volition. Andy understands how he feels, and she places her hand on his cheek and tells Zeus that picking up that little boy back in Passchendaele is one of the biggest highlights of her life. They hold each other close, just like back in the day, like mother and son, and Andy finally apologizes to him for not being like other mothers. Zeus jokes that he will get used to it by the time he is 80, and this is when Andy asks her son to cook her some more food because she loves it so much. This story takes place in Eagan, Minnesota on July 20th, 1969, on the day of the moon landing. Nikki and Booker are in Eagan to carry out a hit, and their conversation reveals that Nikki and Joe have been fighting lately. Nikki is refusing to call Joe in order to patch things up because he is too focused on carrying out this hit, and though Booker understands his motivation, he can also understand why Joe is angry with him for not being there to watch the moon landing with him instead. Just like Booker, Andy is keeping meeting Joe Company at a bar, and their conversation reveals that Nikki is out to carry out a hit on a child rapist and murderer who targets kids below the age of 18 and has killed around 24 of them. The man in question is Detective Van Hoyt, who gets ambushed by Nikki once he returns from his kitchen after having lit the gas under a teapot. Van Hoyt framed a man named Carl Edwin Hack in the Ripper case of the Great Lakes, but Nikki knows the truth, and so does he. Nikki points out all the discrepancies in the case, how it was too convenient for Van Hoyt to frame Carl once he realised that he matched the killer's description. Van Hoyt is about to reach for his gun, but this is when Booker walks out of the closet and warns him against it. They continue to threaten him, hit him over the head, and recount how he framed Carl. Back at the bar, a drunk Joe tells Andy why it's important for him to watch the moon landing alongside Nikki. Beautiful things are only beautiful if you get to experience them with someone you love. Back at Van Hoyt's place, everyone jumps into action when the teapot starts whistling, and though Van Hoyt is faster and manages to shoot Nikki in the chest, this only annoys the latter. Meanwhile, Joe and Andy discuss the importance of the moon landing, and Andy doesn't find it beautiful or amusing at all. After all, every time man has stepped into a new place or a new continent, massacres have followed, and for the moon's sake, Andy hopes it doesn't house any natives. Van Hoyt, meanwhile, is begging for his life. He will do anything, resign from his job, turn himself in, but sadly, he doesn't get a second chance. Not after what he has done. Both Nikki and Booker shoot him in the head, and once the job is done, Booker once again urges Nikki to call Joe and patch things up. Joe and the rest of the bar, meanwhile, celebrate the moon landing, and though he looks happy, Andy knows Joe is dying inside, which is why she reassures him that Nikki will call sooner or later. Of course, Nikki will call him. Joe knows that. It's just sad that they didn't get to experience this together. The Old Guard, Volume 3, Tales Through Time, Issue Number 4, How to Make a Ghost Town and Love Letters. Andy stands where she and Achilles once made their home. The town, or what used to be of it, is no more, only the remains of a destroyed house and the tree with Achilles' grave under it. Andy had left this place to keep her love safe. She had left after he had asked her to do so for months, but what she hadn't noticed was her nosy neighbours, who kept a close eye on her and her life. Once she was gone, Achilles spent a few days reminiscing about the past. He reminisced about the time the two of them were outlaws, murdering, slaughtering, and bounty hunting. Frankly, Achilles liked it that way, but it was Andy who asked him to settle down. She was the one who wanted to build a home, and Achilles couldn't have wanted more. Andy buried her axe because she didn't want the blood from it on her new home, and she buried it in the same spot under the tree. They built their new home, lived a wonderful life, and even welcomed their new neighbours when they moved in, which eventually resulted in a small town. It was a fine place to live, and, unfortunately, a fine place to die as well. And though they lied to everyone over the years, questions still persisted. What happened to your wife, Achilles? What happened to your daughter? What happened to your granddaughter? Achilles had always known what it felt like to be hunted. After all, he was a slave who managed to escape, and so, unlike Andy, he had buried his past under his bed, and thus, when the feeling of being hunted again returned, he asked Andy to leave and unearthed his past. That night, the townspeople stormed his house with torches and pitchforks, and though Achilles tried to fight back, they killed him and burned their house down. Andy was about to go to fight in Jamaica, which is why she returned to say goodbye for the last time. What she found were the charred remains of her former lover amidst the ashes of the home they had built. And so, Andy dug up the axe she had hidden and then killed all of the neighbours ruthlessly and burned their houses to the ground as well. How do you make a ghost town, you ask? First, you take a town and then fill it with ghosts. This is the story of Nikki and his sole mission to fight against the Confederates during the Civil War in 1863. Nikki was bloodied, heavily wounded, and dressed in a Confederate uniform when he died this time. And when he came back, he was found by his fellow soldiers who nursed him back to health. The next day, now fully recovered, Nikki is busy writing a letter to Joe, telling him all about his struggles, when he gets a glimpse into the ideology of the Confederates. Confederates, who believe the white man to be the superior race. Why else would God have created their superior race if he didn't want them to rule the world? This got Nikki thinking, and as he watched the soldiers round up people of colour and usher them into a wagon like animals, Nikki decided to reveal his hand. He was never on their side in the first place. This is something he has done numerous times, and it's time that he executed his plan again. Nikki attacks the soldiers before they take the prisoners away, and once he has murdered each and every one in sight, he frees the captives and asks them to flee before the other soldiers catch up to them. But before they leave, he asks them a favour. He hands them his letter and asks them to deliver it to Joe, who they will find in the Friends Meeting House in York, south of Harrisburg. It's where they'll find safety as well. And so, with the letter now on its way, Nikki finds another abandoned log and pretends to be dead beside it until he is found by another band of Confederate soldiers, and thus the cycle begins once again. The Old Guard, Volume 3, Tales Through Time, Issue number 5, An Old Soul and Never Gets Old. We're in Times Square in 1978, and the place is overrun with strip clubs and escort bars, and in the background, a couple of nuns are claiming that this is Armageddon and that every sinner is going to pay their dues. Booker, meanwhile, is stumbling through the streets while high on cheap vodka, and this is when he encounters the nuns. They tell him that God offers a chance even to the worst of sinners, and this is when Booker decides to entertain them and go to their church because he has nothing better to do. But once inside, he realizes that these nuns mean business. They don't plan on praying and singing hymns. They plan on fighting against evil and what they perceive to be the devil with guns. Booker laughs, ridicules them, and calls them fools for believing in God because there is no such thing. And before they can kill him or offer him some more manipulation, Booker pulls out his own pistol and shoots himself in the head to prove his point. The nuns think another sinner has succumbed to the evils of the devil, but this is when Booker comes back to life and proves his point. Because if there really was a God, then how is he going to explain someone like Booker existing? 3 months later, Andy storms the same group's tabernacle in Guyana, and though the place is crawling with armed nuns, there is no stopping her, and after killing dozens of them, she finally finds Booker tied to a huge wooden X in one of the tents. Andy spent weeks tracking him here, and she is furious when he tells her that he let himself get trapped, because not only do the nuns murder her, but they also sleep with him. They don't know whether he's an angel or the devil, but they believe his bodily fluids can help them. Andy tells him to shut up. She frees him and orders Booker to get dressed because he is getting rescued whether he likes it or not. And so the two escape the compound and murder any armed nun that stands in their way. This is a short story of Booker's time with his family when they still liked him and didn't hate him for being immortal. He is out to have dinner with his son, and when they are seated in the restaurant, Booker remarks how once getting served any dish you want used to be a luxury reserved only for the nobles and their estates. His son knows that his father is immortal, and he thinks that this is something the public should know, which is why he isn't afraid to talk about his father's past in public. This ultimately comes to play when a rowdy, drunk patron claims to see the manager upon seeing the bill because instead of having the buffet, he ended up ordering a la carte. The man complains that the bill is highway robbery, and this is when Booker puts the man in his place by telling him about actual highway robbers, how ruthless they were, and how he should ask his father about them because he helped finish them off years ago. Despite Booker's protests, his son continues to instigate the man, and this is when, under his breath, Booker remarks that Andromache was right. He shouldn't have told his family about his immortality. However, this is when things escalate and the man arms himself with a knife. To pacify the situation, Booker invites the man for a drink at the bar while playing to his ego by claiming that he is a great man for having fought in the revolution and how the new generation will truly value what he has sacrificed for them. The man seems pleased by Booker's words, but when he tells the man that he served under Napoleon, the patron ends up slicing Booker's throat. The man then runs away, and the manager follows close behind him while calling out to nearby gendarmes. Once the entire restaurant is empty, Booker finally gets up, cleans himself, and upon reconciling with his son, the two leave the restaurant happier than before. The Old Guard, Volume 3, Tales Through Time, Issue number 6, Many Happy Returns, and The Bear. This story takes place between the events of Volume 1 and Volume 3, the time when Booker was exiled. We see him visiting the Musée d'Histoire de Marseille in France for the third time because the museum has a special exhibition with artifacts of soldiers from the Napoleonic Wars. We then see that Booker visits this exhibit to stare at a doll from his past, a doll that he held close even after the soldiers had stolen his possessions and threw the doll away. It always brought tears to his eyes, just like it does in the present day. In the evening, Booker walks out of the museum in a daze, completely unaware that Nile and Andy have been scoping out the place. Nile wants to do something special for Booker's birthday, and she has the perfect plan. She hands her iPad to quickly go over it, but Andy never liked reading, so she quickly ends up imagining the plan as a heist movie, one where she rappels down into the museum while armed guards and lasers protect the exhibit. As she tries to steal the doll, she alerts the guards, which forces her to kill all of them. Nile quickly snaps her back to reality and tells her to stop watching heist movies. There won't be any need for killing on this job. And so that night, Nile infiltrates the facility as a janitor, while Andy knocks out a truck driver and takes over his vehicle. Nile keeps the lady working with her occupied and on her toes, while Andy infiltrates the facility under the guise of the truck driver. Everything is going according to plan, and after letting her partner take an early break, Nile quickly heads to the special exhibit to steal the doll. However, this is when Andy informs her over the radio that a guard is heading her way because he wants to see the special exhibit for himself. Nile is in the middle of stealing the doll, which is why she begs Andy to buy her some more time, and thus Andy reluctantly crashes the truck into the museum's gate, which prompts the guard to quickly rush back upstairs. The doll is already gone, and that morning, Booker finds a gift waiting for him in his apartment when he returns after drinking the night away. He is surprised to find the doll inside, and this is when we are shown why it means so much to him. Booker was a prisoner who was forced to join Napoleon's army, and this doll was given to him by his son so that Booker would never forget him. Booker walks to the window, clutches the doll close to his heart, and silently whispers, "Thank you, knowing too well who is responsible for this gift." And it's true. Andy and Nile get the message. They have never seen Booker happier, and the two of them decide to celebrate his birthday from a nearby balcony while feasting on some expensive champagne. A man armed with a rifle and long hair walks into a remote mountain town and enters the local hunting shop, only to be warmly greeted by its owner. They know him. This is Isaac, and he always visits the town to stock up on supplies before the winter. Manning the counter is Dot, his longtime friend and on and off flame. The two flirt with each other a bit, and Dot promises to stock up his boat with all the necessary supplies before he heads out tomorrow. Isaac smiles and pays Dot in gold coins, and this is when we realise why everyone in town loves him so much. He then enters Red's bar, and it's revealed that everyone had been expecting him, including the owner, Red. Red has also kept all the packages addressed to Isaac over the past few months, and when Isaac tries to pay him for his work, Red refuses to take any money from him. Dot and he flirt a little more, and after spending the night in town, Isaac leaves after stocking up his boat. We see that he lives in the middle of nowhere, and after transferring all the supplies to his ATV, he heads back to his cabin in the woods. Inside, Isaac's cabin is littered with ancient artifacts in every direction. He also seems to be doing some important research that night, and the next day, we see him go out hunting for some rabbits. However, when Isaac is returning with his catch, he is attacked by a Kodiak bear. The bear rips open his guts, bites his neck, and then slams Isaac against a nearby tree. Once the job is done, the bear grabs the rabbits and tries to leave, only to be called out by Isaac, who by now has completely healed. The bear listens to him, drops the rabbits on the ground when Isaac asks him to do so, and this is when Isaac takes pity on the animal and decides to let him accompany him. After all, he too could do with some company during the winter. And this is the last page, and Volume 3 ends with the revelation that Isaac is the 8th Immortal.